Reborn as the Viking Pirate King. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction, so please don't attempt real magic. The results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 76: The establishment of the Wuya Town Production Brigade. After the lively marriage, Duke Bernard led his men out of Coldwater Village. That afternoon, Loki counted his men and set off for Foggy Duck. For the past few days, nearly 1,000 people had crammed into the cramped Coldwater Village, nearly overwhelming the tiny fishing village. He urgently needed to transport the excess population to Foggy Duck and personally inspect his territory. Duke Bernard was a wise man. At the wedding, he had clearly stated that the city belonged to his daughter, Una. Therefore, Una was also in the group. Since early that morning, she had been complaining about the dilapidated and shabby living conditions of Coldwater Village. Unable to provoke this living Buddha for the time being, Loki considered quickly transporting her to Blackstone Castle in Foggy Duck, lest he lose control of his rage and accidentally kill her. Walking along the official road, the breath of early spring was already blowing in. The temperature on the peninsula had risen to around 10 degrees Celsius. The sun rose, melting the snow and ice on the mountain peaks, and the river was filled with broken ice from upstream. New buds were sprouting vigorously on the branches of shrubs that had been dry for months, and the animals of the vast forest were leaving their nests due to hunger. 2 days later, the group arrived at Foggy Duck Town, nestled in the mountains. This was Loki's first time setting foot on Foggy Duck soil. Upon arriving, he discovered that Foggy Duck wasn't much larger than Frostwater Village. Centered around Blackstone Castle, it housed approximately 100 households within and around the city walls, accommodating approximately 600 people. Blackstone Castle was a stone fortress covering approximately 2,000 square meters. From its exterior, it was indeed far more luxurious than the wooden castle of Frostwater Village. The stone used to build the castle was black stone mined from the nearby mountains. This stone, rich in iron and nickel minerals, had a dark, meteorite-like color. Even in early spring, the castle was still chilly and gloomy. Walking through, Loki discovered that the Blood Pigeon Town cavalry had destroyed most of the furniture and looted all the valuables in Foggy Duck during their invasion. But Miss Una didn't mind. They're just some country bumpkins junk, anyway. Even if they were still sitting here intact, I'd throw them all out and replace them with the latest from the Eastern Tang Dynasty. As long as this castle is mine, that's all. As for you, country bumpkin, you can't enter this castle without my permission, you know? My dowry is enough for me to squander my life, and don't even think of bribing me with it to serve you. Haha, I understand. Don't worry, you won't see me, Loki chuckled. This widowhood marriage had already satisfied him greatly. But now, hearing that this young lady wouldn't even spend her own money, he felt like singing a divine hymn to the heavens. This truly was a little angel sent by God. Accompanying Miss Una into Blackstone Castle were over 20 cooks, 50 bodyguards, over 30 maids, 20 fine horses, and 2 butlers. Loki could sense that his young lady wasn't particularly favored by Duke Bernard. Yet, even such an unpopular figure in the family was married off with such lavishness. A provincial duke among the Viking pirates was truly wealthy enough to rival a nation. After settling his lady, Loki left her alone. His real concern lay with Foggy Duck's 2 pillars of industry, the logging base and the oil refinery. These 2 economic structures were his most significant acquisitions. Coldwater Village was now swarming with Duke Bernard's spies. Any attempt at sea raiding would inevitably involve the Duke's spies aboard, and this would require paying a hefty tax to his respected father-in-law. However, within the peninsula, all production within his territory belonged to him. Not a penny had to be shared. Foggy Duck's logging base and oil refinery were, in his eyes, 2 treasure troves. After a trip to England and a brutal battle, Loki learned a lesson: what goes around comes around, and sooner or later, it's paid back. It's not always the case that you can only chop down others, while others can't. Powerful nations entrenched across continents, formidable warriors of all colors, are constantly on the hunt. Not every raid will necessarily yield a stable return. Losing everything is a common occurrence for pirates. In such times, The village's production facilities provide a margin of error, a guarantee for surviving the harsh winter. The logging base is nestled in the mountains, about an hour's walk from Foggy Duck. Even the toughest Vikings know the saying, "A rabbit doesn't eat grass near its burrow." The tall coniferous forests surrounding the village are all trees over a century old, and the timber for felling is harvested within the mountains. The Gonk family, who have ruled Foggy Duck for 10 years, have divided the forest into 20 sections, logging one section annually for a 20-year cycle. This cycle is based on the roughly 20-year growth cycle of coniferous trees. Why this logging method? This wasn't because the 8th century Vikings understood sustainable development, but rather because the centuries-old, even millennia-old trees nestled deep in the mountains were simply too much for the Slavic slaves to cut. Only these younger trees, with a growth cycle of around 20 years, could be easily cut and loaded onto carts by the Slavic loggers. The timber typically ranged from 50 to 80 centimeters in diameter, meeting the Vikings' daily construction needs. Besides logging, Foggy Duck Town also employed a production method, collecting pine oil that fell from trees. This oil was then boiled at low temperatures to evaporate the water vapor within. This oil was then mixed with oil from the underground of the Dragon's Breath Plateau in a suitable proportion to create a fuel that could be easily ignited. The fuel workshop was located outside the village because boiling the oil produced a strong odor. Old Gunk exemplified the principle of living off the mountain, relying on a logging operation, an oil refinery, and over 100 Slavic slaves to eventually train 200 professional Viking warriors. While Foggy Duck's industry pales in comparison to the coastal salt works of Blood Pigeon Town, it's still far superior to Coldwater Village, which relies solely on pickled herring. Fuel oil and wood are essential for Viking life, especially wood. Vikings rely on wood for shipbuilding and house building. Nearly 500 Slavic men and women have moved into Foggy Duck, representing all the Slavic slaves from Coldwater Village and those gifted to Loki by Duke Bernard. After settling in, Loki summoned everyone to the square in front of Blackstone Castle for the first meeting of Foggy Duck's new leader. "I know you've worked under the yoke of the Gonk family. But today I'm changing that. First, from this moment on, you will no longer work for your lords, but rather for yourselves, your wives, and your children, to ensure a better life. I hereby proclaim the following laws. 1. All workers enrolled in the government will receive 3 insurances and 1 housing fund. The first of these 3 insurances is pension insurance. Workers who joined the Wuya Town Production Brigade and completed 30 years of service were eligible for a pension insurance policy. This policy meant that after 30 years, even if they were over 50 and stayed home, they would still have a stable income. Upon hearing this, all the workers present were stunned. For Slavic slave laborers, losing their ability to work often meant losing all their value. In such a situation, they faced certain certainty. They had never even heard of this pension insurance benefit, let alone seen it. The second insurance was unemployment insurance. If a factory employee suffered a work-related injury and became unable to work, the Wuya Town Production Brigade would provide medical care and a stable income even after they became incapacitated. The third insurance was medical and education insurance. All employees of the Wuya Town Production Brigade, including their families, would have unconditional access to education and medical care. Regardless of how many wives or children a worker had, the entire family benefited from one employee. Finally, the one fund was the Housing Provident Fund. You don't understand this term now, it doesn't matter, listen to me explain it to you carefully. From now on, the house you live in can be bought from the Wuya Town Production Brigade. After buying the house, you will always have the property rights of this property and the land where the house is located. As long as the property rights are in hand, your descendants, and your descendants' will always have the right to live in this house. No one has the right to take your private property away from you. As long as you join the Wuya Town Production Brigade, in addition to the fixed income every month, you will also receive an additional housing and land provident fund that can only be used to purchase houses or land. This money will help you buy your own property faster and settle down as soon as possible. As for the workers who have already bought houses, Wuya Town will also open up new arable land and forest farms. In addition to houses, you can also use this money to buy land that belongs only to you. These arable lands and forest farms will also belong to your descendants forever. I have had a fever these days, and the updates are not very stable. Please forgive me. Chapter 77 New Adventure. Loki's goal was to make Foggy Duck Town their new home for as many of these Slavic slaves as possible. To this end, He implemented several measures. First, the town would be populated almost entirely by Slavs. This was similar to the autonomous regions for ethnic minorities in the previous life. The Red Kingdom had spent 50 years proving that this path of assimilating these ethnic minorities was feasible. As long as they were offered a better life, they would have no reason to rebel. Second, he would grant them permanent land and property. In the Middle Ages, land and housing belonged to the lords. Poor peasants could only rent land and houses from the lords, suffering from their exploitation for generations. This led to a tragic situation where the great lords exploited the lesser lords, and the lesser lords exploited the serfs. This was undoubtedly what Loki aimed to change. After this decree, the hard-working would undoubtedly be the first to own their own land and property. In time, they would become the first landowners, merchants, or even free farmers. This would also mark a significant step for the Vikings from a slave society to a feudal one. Loki knew these Slavic slaves wouldn't be able to digest so many advanced concepts from thousands of years ago. But that didn't matter. He had already had Sanji carve these laws, which were no longer relevant to this era, onto wooden tablets and placed them at the gates of Blackstone Castle. The Slavic slaves hesitantly stepped forward to study them carefully, those who understood them diligently explaining them to those who didn't. After a morning, all the slaves poured into the production team's gates, demanding to be converted into workers. And just then, Loki issued his next decree. If the 3 social insurances and 1 housing fund merely ignited the slaves' enthusiasm, this one completely transformed them into his followers. This decree was titled, the Household Contract Responsibility System. In November 1978, in Xiagang Village, Fengli Commune, Chiguhu Province, 18 impoverished farmers signed a production contract. It stipulated the following points: 1. Distribute land to households. 2. No longer ask the commune for money or grain. By October 1979, the threshing grounds of Xiagang Village were ablaze with golden yellow. That year's total grain output surpassed a combined total of the previous 5 years. Gone were the days of communal meals. The household contract responsibility system was born, whereby land was contracted to households, a portion of the grain was handed over to the state, and the remainder was privately owned. From then on, the Red Kingdom's economy took off, and farmers' pockets quickly became richer. Wuya Town, using only slave labor, was extremely inefficient. While outdated production methods were a factor, the workers' lack of enthusiasm was also a significant factor. By then, the number of Slavic slave laborers in Hanshu village and Wuya Town had exceeded 500. To encourage these aliens to fight for Loki while defending their homeland, the best way was to provide them with a safe and prosperous life. The woodlands outside the village for logging, the red pine forests for oil refining, and the farmland outside the village for livestock, etc., will be divided by the commune into 100 separate contract plots, 1 plot per household. Every year, each household will only need to pay a fixed amount of the harvest to the Wuya Town Production Brigade, and the rest will be privately owned. After this order was issued, the Slavs looked at each other in bewilderment. They could understand every word Loki spoke, but when they put it together, "Lord, are you saying, we each become our own lord?" After a long hesitation, a Slavic slave cautiously said this. "That's exactly what I mean. The production brigade won't exploit all of your labor. We'll collect a fixed portion according to the law, and the rest? The hard-working will naturally earn more. They can use their extra money, plus their housing provident fund, to quickly buy more property and more land, becoming the richest people in Fogduck Town, and the lazy ones, haha. Your land might be bought by others, and even your houses might be sold for food in years of disaster. You'll forever live in houses rented from the rich, working for others, and having your surplus value exploited. The lives of your descendants will be very different." A buzz of discussion rose, and Wenzoff, beside Loki, took the opportunity to step forward and announce production targets for different plots of land. Contract a forest farm and pay the production brigade 60 logs per month. The production team will sell any excess logs, but the proceeds are yours. Contract a field and pay the production team 500 kilograms of wheat per year. Each item was recited, and Loki's feet were silent. The production team's workload wasn't heavy, and if they worked diligently, the Slavic slaves could accumulate a considerable fortune over the course of a year. Everyone's eyes sparkled with excitement. That day, over 500 slaves joined the Misduck Town Production Brigade. Wenzoff, the steward of Hanshu village, took over as the brigade's leader. He appointed several hard-working subordinates as squad leaders, and in just a few hours, they had contracted out all of Miss Ducktown's forests, fields, and livestock. That evening, workers, carrying saw blades, headed deep into the mountains. From now on, they worked not for their slave owners but for their own future property and land. Everyone's enthusiasm was galvanized. To manage this Slavic autonomous region, Loki's next step was to consider acquiring the statues needed for the construction of the Hakaran temple. The growing Miss Ducktown would rapidly accumulate wealth, and this wealth would inevitably attract raiders from all directions. The Vikings were not known for robbing only foreigners, not their own people. The 6 provinces of Scandinavia were plagued by constant conflict. These bandits targeted anyone with money. Furthermore, if their target was a village populated almost entirely by Slavs, they felt no need to worry. Foggy Duck needed to strengthen its defenses. Security Captain Sad and 10 other attendants were still in Valhalla, nestled in the mountains. They couldn't be relied upon in the short term. Loki felt the safest approach was to build a temple of Hakar within Foggy Duck. This would give these Slavs a familiar deity and allow them to become the chosen ones he desired. This would be beneficial for both security and the long-term development of the village. 5 days later, after careful consideration, Loki gifted Oleg and 5 other Slavs a Viking longship and a ferryman. For someone as insignificant as Oleg, Loki didn't bother adding additional personnel to supervise him. The ferryman would simply row the boat. If Oleg could return with the statue, he would be the abbot of the Hakaran temple in Fogduck Town. If he couldn't, that didn't matter. A longboat and a boatman, with the current financial resources of Coldwater Village, they could still afford the loss. Loki hadn't arranged a return date for him. If he wanted, he could spend half a year exploring the Slavic lands before returning. He didn't even come to see him off, as he had more important things to do. In the Lord's study in the Coldwater Village castle, Loki sat upright. "Lord, are you giving those Slavs too much freedom?" Wenzov asked. "Haha, my dear butler, after so many years, you still don't know me well enough. They do own land and property, but is there any difference between the land being nominally mine and the land being nominally theirs? For the Lord, there is no difference, just like their houses. The houses are nominally theirs, and they will use their own labor to build houses for themselves, but even if these people don't build their own homes, can I let them sleep in the woods? In the end, doesn't the burden still fall on my own hands?" Wenzov clicked his head, feeling as if he understood, but also as if he didn't understand. "All we paid was a verbal promise and a thin piece of papyrus called a property deed, that's all. Let's talk about this pension insurance, haha." In the eyes of the Slavic workers, it's sheer madness for a lord like me to support them when they can't work. But think carefully, my dear steward, how many people in all Scandinavia actually live to be 40, not even 1 in 20, the same goes for unemployment insurance. How many lumberjacks get injured while felling? It's something that seems very humane, but in reality, almost no one needs it. As for this housing provident fund, haha, it'll keep these free Slavic workers living forever in my Hanshu village. My dear steward, real estate is always a free man's greatest prison. Wenzov scratched his head again. This seemingly perfect welfare policy actually had so many hidden traps. But Loki hadn't finished. They'll work tirelessly while remaining grateful to me, their lord. If war breaks out in my domain, I don't even need to mobilize them. They'll take up arms to defend their properties. And what about us? All we actually pay is a few flimsy pieces of paper or a bunch of pretty good promises. I don't have to feed them, build them houses, or whip them into labor. I simply get thousands of skilled workers for free. That's what a proper lord should do." Wenzov looked out the window at the workers working busily, then at the smiling lord before him, feeling as if he had grasped something. With the arrival of spring, all things revived. The castle was no longer cold, and a warm breeze blew in from behind. He gently opened volume 16 of a general map of the world, which had lain untouched all winter. Behind him, Jerome cast a spell, casting a ray of holy light. Words drawn by the light immediately emerged from the blank papyrus. End of volume 2. Chapter 78. There are fish in the North Sea. There is a fish in the North Sea, its name is Kun. This is the first sentence to appear in the book. It comes from Zhuangzi, Happy Journey, a representative figure of the Taoist school among the Pre-Kin philosophers. His debate on the Haolian Bridge: "You are not a fish, how can you understand the joy of a fish? You are not me, how can you know that I do not know the joy of a fish?" and Zhuangzhou's dream of the butterfly remain hotly debated topics in philosophy even 2,000 years later. Loki had never imagined that this book would include an ancient figure he had learned about in Chinese textbooks. This immediately piqued his interest. As the holy light illuminated him, he continued reading while copying the words reflected by the light with his brush. During the Warring States period, the Taoist school flourished. Zhuangzi, the founder of Taoism, had, in his early years, soared across the land on a sword. Taoist texts contain familiar references to the giant beast Kunpeng. This piqued Qin Shi Huang's interest. After unifying the empire, he dispatched Kigan practitioners from across the land to cultivate god-killing elixirs, vowing to slay the ancient evil gods lurking in the shadows of the 9 provinces, bewitching the barbarians. Foremost among these were the Kunpeng and Peng beasts. Kigan practitioners traveled the lands, utilizing the techniques of the various schools of thought to search for the ancient gods. Among these ancient gods, the most elusive were the Kun and Peng mentioned by Zhuangzi. Even until his death, the first emperor expressed regret in his will for not having found the Kunpeng. Xiaolu believed this was a key reason why the first emperor ultimately did not achieve immortality. Below this text was a picture composed of light. This was not a Tang Dynasty parallel perspective print by Mo Yiquan. Instead, it was a 3D bird's eye view tilted at a 45-degree angle. The perspective was incredibly precise, depicting a creature as vast as a mountain range. This creature had a fish-like head in appearance, but also 6 short claws like a turtle. Its back was a sea of pitch-black mountains. The most outrageous thing was that within those mountains lay a city clearly composed of regularly spaced buildings and streets. Leviathan saw this image appear, and Jerome, beside Loki, whispered softly. Job, verse 41. Its belly is as hard as potsherds, leaving a bottomless abyss wherever it passes. Its eyes burn like the blazing sun, and thick smoke billows from its nostrils. It fears nothing from the brave, and scorns all who are mighty. It is the mountain that walks on the land of the Holy Lord, the Leviathan that crushes all things. As a copyist for the Holy Lord Church, Jerome was fluent in all the books within the church. Loki looked at him hesitantly. Jerome gently pointed at the light pattern and said, I've seen this painting before. It's from the ancient Hebrew book, the Book of Job, written 1,000 years ago. This method of using light and perspective was passed down to the Greek scholar Socrates. Only his disciples mastered this method to create 3-dimensional patterns with precise proportions on a flat surface, and until recently, the Book of Isaiah, about 700 years ago, also mentioned the Leviathan. After a moment's reflection, Jerome murmured, on that day, Jehovah will punish Leviathan with his awakening fire, driving it from the lands of mankind into the vast ocean, to the ends of the world's frozen shores. This is a passage from the Bible. It roughly means that 700 years ago, when the Holy Lord Jehovah was alive, Leviathan attempted to crawl from the sea onto land, but was driven to the end of the world by the Holy Lord's flaming sword. Loki's face was solemn. Similar creatures were mentioned not only in the Holy Bishop's story, but also in the ancient legends of the Vikings. They called this land-sized marine creature a whale island. When it's moving, it's a whale. When it's still, it's an island. This creature appeared several times thousands of years ago during the War of the Gods. Even the god King Odin was unable to effectively deal with this mountain-sized creature. The gods of Valhalla, like the Holy Lord Jehovah, could only banish it, not completely destroy it. The following pages unfold a more detailed account of the story. Pre-Kigan practitioners devoted enormous manpower and resources to capturing Kunpeng. However, the creature's enormous size was only one factor. Its movement was also incredibly fast. The Maoist and Taoist method of locating cities by the stars was very effective when searching for immovable cities or ancient tombs. However, finding a Kun that could travel 30,000 miles a day was beyond their capabilities. The Qin dynasty's pursuit of both Kun and Peng remained unfinished until the death of Emperor Qin Shi Huang. Wandering Kigan practitioners ventured into the heavens and earth, yet only a few sightings were recorded. After witnessing its enormity, some drew their swords and advanced, only to be slaughtered by the outer gods in the city behind the beast. Others managed to infiltrate the city. However, the images and written records left behind are extremely rare. The Tang dynasty scholar Xiaolu, who compiled this book, spent half his life poring through ancient scrolls, only to find 2 animal skin drawings left by pre-Qin Kigan practitioners. The first depicted a majestic city. Its layout was reflective, reminiscent of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Its buildings and streets were a pitch-black basalt hue, blending seamlessly with the mountains behind. At the center, Where the streets converged, stood a massive black pyramid. The pyramid resembled the stepped structures of Mayan and Aztec civilizations, with a black figure standing on each level. Each figure's head bore a large eye. Below this image were three characters. Erosion Country, the other painting, entirely different in style, featured a single color, red. It represented the sleeve of a garment. It was torn from the robe and painted with crimson ink, akin to blood. The monochrome image was crude and primitive. It depicted a cave. Several explorers carrying torches walked ahead, their light illuminating the various strange animal bones within. These bones were clearly larger than those of ordinary creatures, and one of them. Loki's eyes widened as he scrutinized it closely. He actually recognized it. Loki clearly remembered seeing a giant sea serpent staring at him from beyond the bubble membrane while submerged. A long line of luminous jellyfish passed by the edge of the outer wall, and he saw the sea serpent's head. In both size and shape, it was identical to the skull in the picture. Both images depicted the city perched on the back of the kun, but the styles were completely different. Below the second image were the words Feng Yao Zuo Wei Lu, Feng Huzi's final work. These words once again gave him a sense of familiarity. He pulled out the original copy of the Sunken City volume compiled by Mo Yiquan, taken from the Sunken City, and after carefully searching through it, he found the name. The right demon guardian was the elder Zhuan Hizi, who had died at the hands of Gu Changqing's sword. The left demon guardian, who had entered the Sunken City with them, was none other than Feng Huzi. That day, after leaving behind Gu Changqing, Zhuan Hizi, and the alchemist Shen Guang, he led 4 others, breaking through the seawater and soaring out of the city on swords. Considering the 3 figures in this image, Loki subconsciously felt that they were most likely the 3 pre-Qin key cultivators who had escaped from the Sunken City. They had left to seek out other gods and more efficiently refine elixirs for Qin Shi Huang. If these figures were them, then wouldn't that mean the country perched on Kun's back be far from Scandinavia? Chapter 79 Iceland in later times. The overall map of the world, volume on the eroded countries fell into my hands, most likely because I traveled to various countries and made many friends. His Majesty Xuanzong said that this move was to spread the power of our prosperous Tang dynasty and to save the people of all nations. The overall map of the world will greatly shorten the distance between all countries in the Kyushu land, allowing them to know what kind of land we live on and where is safe and where is dangerous on this land. Therefore, His Majesty requires meticulous research and careful exploration. The workload of the overall map of the world volume on the eroded countries is too large to be completed relying solely on the people of one place. I first contacted the Zoroastrianism in the Central Asian countries and found the Holy Lord Church, the most popular church in the Western continent. Many of the documents of the Holy Lord are stored in their holy city. Only those who have been baptized and joined the Holy Lord can apply to view them. In order to complete the task assigned to me by His Majesty Xuanzong, I joined the Holy Lord Church and advanced to a high sequence through cultivation. When I entered the archives of the Holy See where the secret scrolls and scriptures are stored, I discovered a serious problem. Ever since the Holy Lord Jehovah wielded his flaming giant sword and banished Leviathan to the corner of the world 700 years ago, Leviathan has not appeared in the world again. This is not normal, you know. This is a giant beast that is almost always on the move. According to the records in ancient books of the pre-Qin Kigan practitioners, Kun travels 30,000 miles a day. Even ordinary sword practitioners riding flying swords cannot keep up with its fish-like swimming speed. But since its last appearance 700 years ago, no one has seen Leviathan again in these long centuries. The Tang people haven't seen it, the foreigners in the Western continent haven't seen it, and when I walked to the New World discovered by the holy bishops and monks, the Mayans who discovered the New World haven't seen it either. This is an old one who has survived on the land of Kyushu for thousands of years. To say that it was killed by a new god like the Holy Lord Jehovah is unrealistic. Therefore, I think it is very likely that it died at the hands of the pre-Qin Kigan practitioners. However, the first emperor's will clearly stated that he regretted not hunting the giant beast Kun mentioned in Xiao Yao Yu, and this doesn't seem false. Therefore, after extensive verification by the holy bishop, the bishops and priests of the Zoroastrianism, and we feel that this thing is very likely to have perished together with the key refining practitioners of the pre-Qin period. The Feng Huzi Jubi II was discovered on the coast by ancient Roman missionaries during the Han Dynasty 500 years ago. At that time, the painting was sealed in the arm bone of a giant sea monster. The bone marrow in the middle of the arm bone had been drained. This roll of coarse cloth was stuffed into the hollow bone, and the surface of the bone was engraved with Qin Dynasty small seal characters. During the Han Dynasty, the Silk Road had already emerged. Han Dynasty merchants from the Eastern Road had already appeared around the Aegean Sea, selling porcelain, spices, silk and other goods. This ancient map was purchased by a Han merchant for the price of 3 kaolin porcelains and then shipped back to our celestial empire. I therefore infer that Leviathan's death must be around the western continent, most likely in the vast icy sea near the Great Cold Sea. Kun is nearly 1,000 miles across. The continent I'm looking for must meet 2 conditions. 1. It must be a continent that didn't exist 1,000 years ago. 2. It must be nearly 1,000 miles wide. Seeing this, Loki couldn't help but frown. He pulled out the Qin Dynasty map of tributes from various tribes under heaven, which had been placed alongside the complete general map of the world, volume on the submerged city, and examined it carefully. His eyes brightened as he examined it. Yes, that's right, there's no outline of Iceland on this map. On this map, the North Sea east of the Scandinavian peninsula is called the Lesser Cold Sea. And north of the peninsula, the vast sea later known as the Norwegian Sea, is called the Great Cold Sea. The Scandinavian peninsula, where the Vikings lived and inhabited, was clearly marked, and the words white-haired savages were written across this landmass, a stereotype held by Han people, who grew up in temperate Asia, toward the inhabitants of northern Europe. Pre-Conquistador practitioners also marked not only the peninsula but also the northern Arctic ice cap on their maps. They called the Arctic ice cap the shadow of extreme cold, shrouded in perpetual cold, without a single sunrise. This was likely because they arrived at the continent during the polar night and did not stay longer. The vast sea between the Scandinavian peninsula and the Arctic ice cap was devoid of any continental landmass. This image differed from the world map Loki remembered. Iceland was not a scattered collection of reefs, but a vast landmass over 600 kilometers in diameter. If this land had existed in the pre-Qin era, the sword cultivators of the pre-Qin era would have surely seen it. However, they did not record it. Brother Jerome, you mentioned that you lived and studied in Constantinople with your mentor, right? Have you ever seen the travel logs or maps drawn by the holy bishops and monks during their missionary work and travels? Jerome nodded, continuing to shine the holy light in his hand. Loki pointed to the Great Cold Sea in the global map, the location of the continent Iceland in his memory. Have you seen any large landmasses in the sea on those maps? No. Jerome shook his head. Monks preached in densely populated countries and rarely ventured into remote areas like these. Even if they did, it was probably to assist departments like the Royal Academy of Sciences of Constantinople, providing them with medical care or morning prayers. The maps drawn by the church don't even show this white ice cap, let alone the islands in the sea. As expected, the holy bishops and monks, who had traveled nearly the entire world by this time and knew even the distant New World and the Americas, were unaware of the existence of Iceland. Does that mean the continent of Iceland is the posthumous transformation of the mysterious Leviathan? In other words, if I find Iceland, I'll have found another ancient god relic? Seeking the ancient gods and exploring extraterrestrial civilizations aren't Loki's primary motivations. Although he gained Foggy Duck Town after a marriage, and Hanshu Village's economic situation has improved significantly, he's not yet wealthy enough to sail the world with a fleet. His true interest lies in the relics of pre-Qin key cultivators left within the deceased behemoth. On his first adventure, the stone sword, white robe, and steel from the fallen titan's hand, those 1,000-year-old relics, played a crucial role in the defense of Hanshu Village. By gifting Jerome the white robe of Zhuangzi, he discovered that it was like completing a Heroes of Might and Magic game. Once his heroes possessed equipment commensurate with their strength, they could unleash the immense power of 1 + 1 = 11. The power boosted by the white robes gave Jerome enough strength to outlast 100 in battle, greatly relieving Loki of his burden. According to the records in this journal, the demon sealing left guardian, Fenghuzi, died in Leviathan City. He even had to seal his final stroke with an animal bones and throw it into the sea. This suggests that the other pre-Qin key cultivators who followed him to the Leviathan also perished. Their bodies were likely within the body of the deceased beast. Sitting in a comfortable reclining chair, Loki pondered for a long time whether to enter his sea of consciousness and ask the Guchanking sealed within him for more information on pre-Qin key cultivators. After much deliberation, he rejected the idea. This person was most likely his enemy. It would be best not to touch him until he could find an effective way to deal with him. Chapter 80, Fortune and Honor are seeked in danger. After 2 days of careful study, Loki had a basic understanding of why the Illuminati's gatekeeper had sought to exchange the ancient book with Old Ward. The volume in Old Ward's possession, compiled by Mo Yiquan, was a finished product ready for submission. It meticulously described the creatures, beliefs, plants, and architecture of the sunken city, a comprehensive regional encyclopedia. This, however, was merely a travel diary recorded with holy light by the Tang Dynasty man named Xiao Lu. The following pages described how he had planned his journey. He had sought the Tang Dynasty's Izumo Trading Company as an investor. This was also the trading company where the Illuminati's gatekeeper worked. Loki felt that this move might have exposed his intentions, leading to his eventual death at the hands of the gatekeeper. The Izumo Trading Company provided him with 10 of the era's most advanced Tang Dynasty building ships, along with all the necessary supplies for a voyage to the Great Cold Sea and even the extreme Yinland, including food, medicine, crews, and fuel. In addition to the Tang people, Xiao Lu, a disciple of the Holy Bishop himself, also joined his expedition team with sealed artifact keepers from the Vatican. Their mission was to investigate for evidence of the existence of the other gods at the landmark, locate and seal the totems of their evil deities, and prevent any foreigners from believing in them. Furthermore, Xiao Lu, with his wide network of friends, also found 2 Zoroastrians from the Arab Empire, a region bordering the east-west continental bridge. Like the Holy Bishop, the Zoroastrians also spread their teachings worldwide. However, their methods of propagation were more secretive, and their beliefs and doctrines were characterized by a degree of paranoia and evil. According to the description of the animal skin scroll by the Universalist Ahe, the Zoroastrians worship a new god called the Lord of Fire. The Lord of Fire's followers call themselves the Fire Transmission Gang, and their missionary work is known as passing on the fire, with the development of new followers being the process of passing on the flame. In many countries led by the holy bishops, such as France, the Visigoths, and the 7 kingdoms of the English Isles, Zoroastrianism is a banned cult, yet its followers are like weeds that can never be eradicated. They can only spring up again after a wildfire. However, for this scientific expedition, the Zoroastrians and the holy bishops, 2 antagonistic sects, temporarily put aside their differences and formed an alliance under Xiao Lu's command. This is a remarkable achievement of this Tang Dynasty scholar. They set out in the 2nd year of the Xianbei period of the Tang Dynasty, which is AD 744. After leaving Yorkshire, they headed north. The handwriting recorded in this ancient book abruptly ended here. Loki examined it carefully and found drops of blood at the foot of the page, as well as the traces of a palm brushing across the page. Can this kind of handwriting, which can only be illuminated by holy light, be erased with the palm of your hand? In principle, it cannot be. The mark of the holy light can only be removed by high-level monks with more refined power. So, Jerome replied. So it seems that there was an internal conflict on the ship. Imagine a fleet composed of 10 Chinese ships. They set out with united will and everyone seemed harmonious on the surface, but in the end, only this book fell into the hands of the Illuminati. Did these people complete the mission alive? Or did they all die? Or did half survive and half die? Are there any ships left by them on the coastline of Iceland? Loki paced around the room for a whole afternoon. At the beginning of spring, everything revived, and the warm breeze blowing in from the window brushed against his cheeks, making him feel a little sleepy. At this time, everything in Hanshu village was in good order. It was no longer the extremely poor and weak appearance of a few years ago. As a lord, he no longer had to go to the fields to sow seeds and fish. Spring is not a season for plundering, and one must always find something to do. How about setting sail and going to the North Sea? Once this idea came into his mind, it took root in his brain like a big poisonous weed. But on second thought, finding Iceland is not an easy task. According to the memory of the world map in his brain, England, on the left side of the Scandinavian peninsula, is a long island that stretches out like a palm. This means that if he wants to cross to the west to England, no matter how his ship is blown by the strong wind while trying to cross the North Sea, this outstretched palm will always catch him and prevent him from getting lost. But Iceland is different. While this island was a landmass, it was significantly smaller than the English Isles. If the English Isles were likened to an outstretched hand, then Iceland would be a ping-pong ball that could fit within it. Hitting a target the size of a ping-pong ball in the vast Norwegian Sea was no easy task. His fleet was very likely to sail past Iceland and head further north for Greenland, a land perpetually covered by ice within the Arctic Circle. If the ship froze to the surface, everyone on board would perish. Furthermore, Loki was no expert in geography. He was just an ordinary Chigao citizen with a bachelor's degree. He knew only that there was an island called Iceland between the Scandinavian peninsula and the Arctic ice cap. He had only a vague idea of its location. He had no idea where it lay, or in what direction. But on second thought, if he could find it, the rewards he could reap would be enormous. First, 4 pre-kin key cultivators died on the island, and their equipment is extremely valuable. If they could find a few more demon sealing blades, or robes that amplify psychic energy, the power of Hanshu villages chosen would be further enhanced. Secondly, Xiaolu's notebook clearly records their departure with a total of 10 warships. If a number of these people perished on the island, is it possible their ships are still docked? Finding 2 or 3 wouldn't require 10 warships, but it would be a huge win. These ships could carry 200 to 300 Viking warriors. A small force could cross the North Sea and reach England. This autumn, we could make a killing. We don't need too many, just extort money from a few wealthy merchants and monasteries, and that would cover the village's expenses for the next year. The prospect of 7 or 8 ships would be too beautiful, but Loki didn't dare to think about it yet. Should he do it or not? Crossing his legs, Loki pondered the bright moon in the sky, ultimately concluding that fortune and honor are found in danger. Duke Bernard had no good intentions in marrying his eldest daughter to him. He had long coveted the fertile salt works of Blood Dove, while Hemel of Blood Dove had long coveted the fortified Storm's End. These 2 old foxes were bound to clash in bloody battle within 3 to 5 years. By then, Loki had no desire to be a pawn at the mercy of others. In the Game of Thrones, it was victory or death. There was no third option. As the bell rang for the end of get out of class at the village church school, Loki took out his bloody stone axe and began to sharpen it vigorously. He already had the answer in his heart. Chapter 81 First Encounter with the Royal Family. Over the next few days, Loki prepared for his voyage. This journey was no less challenging than the one to England. Although he lacked a clear map of the world, he knew finding Iceland would be far more difficult than England. This time, he would lead the only remaining 3-masted ship and the Tang Dynasty ship returned to him by his father-in-law. These 2 ships would carry approximately 60 people. After all, the primary goal of this operation was to locate the ships left behind by Xiaolu's expedition team on the coast. Once they were found, Loki would need sufficient manpower to sail them from distant Iceland back to Scandinavia. Therefore, he needed sufficient manpower on board. Secondly, he needed food. Loki packed the Tang Dynasty ship, with its impressive carrying capacity, with plenty of supplies. He also brought along Aunt Fafnir, a villager who had recently been promoted to Sequence 9C citizen of the Fisherman's Path. Although this one-legged woman lost a leg in battle, her heroic deeds were noticed by the gods, who granted her the status of Chosen One at the age of 40. While not a combat order, having a skilled sea folk on board during ocean voyages greatly increased the team's endurance. This allowed Loki to dedicate more storage space to fresh water, relying on fishing for sustenance. Also aboard were 2 navigators who had awakened the sailor order. 1 man, 1 woman, both Viking fishermen from the village. After several days of observation, Loki discovered that the Sailor's Path Sequence 9 wind listener could easily identify ocean currents and winds, and predict the wind direction for the next few days. This was their only divine power, but to Loki, it was already miraculous enough. In the medieval era, without satellites or weather forecasts, being able to predict currents and wind direction for the next few days was a skill akin to a semi-weather forecaster, extremely useful on the vast ocean. In addition to the men, he also used the gold and silver gifted by his father-in-law to purchase 12 sled dogs. These large hunting dogs, a cross between ice wolf and sheepdog, were used by wealthy Viking farmers as guard dogs. However, Loki clearly remembered the Antarctic expeditions conducted in the 17th and 18th centuries, when the British Royal Society's icebreakers became frozen in the ice and could not move forward. Voluntary expeditions, however, used the primitive method of dog sledding to cross the continent. If Iceland remained frozen in early spring, these dogs would be invaluable. When selecting villagers to join the ocean-going vessel, Loki had carefully prepared a pitch. Spring is the season of rebirth, when hunters head into the mountains to hunt and farmers plow and sow. He hadn't expected anyone to join him on this life-threatening expedition. However, the registration process was surprisingly popular. Just a winter ago, the image of Sartre and his group of 20-somethings, pockets full of gold and silver, was still fresh in the minds of all the residents of Hanshu village. They then joyfully journeyed to Valhalla together, yet they haven't returned yet. It's hard to tell how many potions they've consumed since then. The honest Vikings harbored no envy, knowing that these men, able to plunder such vast sums of gold and silver from across the sea, must have paid a heavy price. But by then, a seed had already been planted in everyone's hearts: follow the village chief to sea, and will surely reap a great harvest. The village chief is Loki reincarnated. He can lead us to victory in a war with such disproportionate odds, so he can surely lead his subordinates to where gold and silver. Despite Loki's repeated explanations that this voyage wasn't a raid, but an expedition, the residents' enthusiasm remained undimmed. Among them, the most excited was Sanji's father, Gormarish. The restless blacksmith had waited a long time for this opportunity. "Lord Loki, look at my arms, look at these strong legs. They say I'm old, but I can still control lightning. Take me aboard. I'll do anything. Repair the boat, row, scrub the floor, fish, cook. I'm still young, a tough nut to crack, the newly chosen one of the Thunder God's path. Let me show you a trick." Just as the old man was about to unleash a set of military punches with his hammer in front of everyone, Loki hurriedly stopped him. "Sir, please calm down. What will happen to the blacksmith shop if you're not in the village? Haha. The blacksmith shop doesn't need me at all. Actually, I'm not afraid of you laughing at me, but my skills have long been failing. Nearly everything used in the village lately has been forged by my disciples. Okay, you take over." The subsequent selection process took almost a day and a night. Loki selected only young men from the village who were skilled in boating. After all, the main purpose of this voyage was to collect trash. He collected relics left behind by deceased pre-Kin key cultivators, as well as the boats Xiolu had left on the coast. To operate a Tang Dynasty boat required at least 5 men. After selecting nearly every experienced boatman in the village and training them for several days, Loki finally finalized his selection. If everything went smoothly, the round trip would take less than a month. If things went poorly, he couldn't say how long it would take. With Wenzoff in charge of the Wuya Town production brigade during his absence, Loki wasn't worried. Back home, Loki pondered for a long time whether to bring along Hanshu village's top warrior, Jerome. However, with Aunt Fafnir leaving with him, Jerome seemed the only one who could help him manage Hanshu village's daily production. After all, roughly 1/3 of the villagers already believed in and supported the holy bishop. His presence would undoubtedly make management much easier. As for the position of security captain, Loki assigned it to the newly minted Valkyrie Katya. Jerome's new wife had already proven her fighting prowess during the siege of Hanshu village. With Katya's assistance, coupled with the numerous chosen ones awakened during the battle, Hanshu village was secure against any major external threat on the peninsula. After completing all these preparations, the night before their departure, a melodious flute suddenly rang out at the gates of Hanshu village. A jet-black carriage, pulled by 4 snow-white war horses, appeared at the entrance to Hanshu village to the sound of musicians. Leading the way were 16 knights armed with spears, followed by at least 50 fully armored shield axemen. The gatekeeper rubbed his eyes vigorously, confirming that what he saw was not an illusion. He then hurriedly opened the gates and knelt respectfully. As the carriage entered the village, villagers along the way, seeing the saber-toothed panther banner on the carriage, bowed respectfully. At that moment, everyone spontaneously forgot Loki's decree that a man shall not kneel to another. The banners and crests draped atop this carriage were simply too dazzling. The carriage sailed unimpeded until it reached Coldwater Keep. At Loki's handmaiden's reminder, they exited the gate and were met with a saber-toothed panther emblem of Viking King Sabertooth O'Sullivan. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 82, Scientists from the Waldorf Family. After 20 years of living after his time travel, Loki had never been to the Conqueror's fortress, nor had he met the Viking King Sabertooth O'Sullivan. Viking rule encompassed 6 provinces in Scandinavia. Even if all the towns and villages were combined, Hanshu village would rank among the lowest. Normally, a royal carriage would never appear here. Deeply astonished, Loki stood respectfully beside the carriage. The gold-encrusted doorknob slowly turned. When the carriage door, Inlaid with a silver arrow-toothed leopard, opened, Loki beheld a breathtaking, exquisite statue. It was a woman remarkably similar to the Roman statues in the Louvre. Her face was softly curved, her skin as white as marble. Unlike the emerald blue eyes of the Vikings, this woman had smooth, straight hair like golden sunlight, and deep green eyes. When those eyes met Loki's, he instinctively tried to drop them to avoid eye contact. This feeling had only occurred to him in his previous life, when he accidentally spotted a celebrity on a plane. It was a breathtaking sensation, like the blazing sun. This woman was so clean. After traveling back to the Middle Ages, what most troubled Loki was the ancient and primitive hygiene practices of the people. In this ancient era, soap required a mixture of whale oil and coal ash to be used, and daily life for modern people presented many challenges. The first thing a normal person would do after waking up was brush their teeth, but here there was neither toothpaste nor toothbrushes. Loki tried to make a toothbrush using various animal hairs, but none could match the satisfaction he'd felt with the plastic of his previous life. The hair was too soft, and the pine needles were too hard. Finally, in desperation, he resorted to tying cotton cloth around a wooden stick, stuffing the slightly bitter whale oil soap into his mouth, and brushing his teeth. Over time, he got used to it. Loki was probably the only Viking who had a habit of brushing his teeth. This made him unbearable to the odor of almost every mouth. Perhaps it was for this reason that, even as a lord, he chose to remain happily single. But this woman was different. Her whole body was immaculate, radiant. She smiled at Loki, revealing a brilliant smile that could have easily stepped onto the set of a Colgate commercial. She wasn't wearing the linen and animal skins accustomed to Vikings. Instead, she wore emerald green silk that flowed like water. This style was the Tang dynasty's most popular open-fronted water cloud-made sleeve robe, with a deep cleavage visible beneath the V-neck. To protect against the early spring chill, she wore a thicker cotton garment draped over her shoulders. Embroidered with a cluster of peonies, it emanated an air of elegance and grace. Seeing Loki petrified, Aunt Fafnir, who had temporarily taken on the role of housekeeper, quickly poked him twice, finally snapping him out of his momentary trance. Loki rubbed his eyes awkwardly and bowed respectfully to the mysterious woman. Licking women was never his style. He treated her politely because he smelled money. Lots of it. Standing before you is the sister of Viking King O'Sullivan, Byzantine Empire diplomat to Conqueror's Fortress, partner of the Conqueror's Fortress branch of the Tang Izumo Trading Company, and the richest Viking merchant, Marinton O'Sullivan. The accompanying butler alighted from the car and chanted a long list of names. The Vikings surrounding the village all knelt. Only Loki bowed respectfully and gently grasped the tender white hand she extended. So this is Hanshu village. It's a bit shabby, but this lord seems quite clever, the noblewoman Marinton said softly with a smile. She had a pair of alluring peach blossom eyes, and their flickering glances held a hint of allure. All right, we've reached our stop. You can get off too. Following the noblewoman, another woman alighted from the car. She didn't wear too many accessories, just a simple leather armor, a short knife slung across her waist, and only a few books on her back that looked out of place in this era. A group of people filed into Coldwater Castle. Loki hurriedly asked the servants to prepare barbecue and the evening banquet. Not to mention him, even his father had never seen the Viking royal family set foot on the land of Coldwater Village. For the time being, he still couldn't figure out why this group of people came uninvited. In the Lord's study, two women sat respectfully in the upper seats, while Loki stood aside obediently like a subject. The Princess Marindin took a sip of the hot tea served by the servants and pointed at the woman next to her who was looking around. Meet Emma Waldorf of the Byzantine Royal Academy of Sciences. The Waldorf family provided me with considerable assistance during my time in Constantinople. Emma is a biologist. She has come with me to Scandinavia to collect animals and plants not yet catalogued by the Academy. She fondly touched the cheek of the young woman beside her. Only then did Loki see that the girl was no more than 17 or 18 years old. When she heard you were sailing north, she couldn't sit still any longer and asked me to take her to Coldwater Village to accompany you on your journey to the unknown northern seas. Hearing this, Loki was shocked. Conqueror's Fortress was nowhere near as far from Coldwater Village as Storm's End. Conqueror's Fortress was on the other side of the peninsula. While the straight-line distance from the river valley, ruled by Duke Bernard, was not far, it was separated by the towering sky-breaking mountains. Driving this kind of carriage, it would take them at least a month to cross 3 provinces to reach this point. This suggests that by the time he and Jerome had completed the plot and was about to decide to sail after inspecting the ships, O'Sullivan in the Conqueror's fortress had already learned of the news. Loki wasn't surprised that the Viking king had spies in Coldwater Village. After receiving a large amount of silver, even the neighboring town of Blood Pigeon knew to establish its own intelligence system. It's impossible for O'Sullivan, a Viking king, to be unaware of this. But isn't the efficiency of this information transmission too high? Loki did have some subordinates with him when he inspected the ships, and he only vaguely mentioned that this might be an expedition heading north. It's likely that a raven carrying the information took off from Coldwater Village that night, and the next day, accurate intelligence reached the Viking royal family. Chapter 83 Blind Believer. Compared to this, Loki was even more interested in the Byzantine girl named Amra Waldorf. His eyes drifted to the badge on her chest, emblazoned with a double-headed golden eagle. Memories of this country flashed through his mind. In the 8th century AD, the Byzantine Empire was a powerful nation. Its strength stemmed from its lineage. In 395 AD, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I died. For some reason, this emperor split the mighty Roman Empire in two, giving the eastern and western halves to his two sons. The Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, lasted for over 1,000 years, making it the longest-standing monarchy in European history and the political, economic, and cultural center of Europe in the 8th century. The Book of Tang names this nation Dakin, a testament to its admiration. According to the records in the book, the Byzantine Empire impressed Tang merchants with three things. First, their glass-making technology was exceptionally advanced, resulting in crystal-clear glass and extremely low cost. Even the proud Tang people called the stained glass craftsmen of Byzantine artisans unparalleled in the world. Secondly, there was their surgical prowess. Some illnesses that seemed incurable to Tang merchants were treated directly by Byzantine doctors through craniotomy and thoracotomy. When soldiers broke bones, doctors would cut through the skin and muscle, using steel and nails to connect the broken bones, and then sew up the wound with needle and thread. This surgical procedure is clearly recorded in Tang history books. The HBO series Roma also describes a craniotomy. Finally, there were the Byzantine merchants. This is the first historical record of a supermarket. Sellers set out their wares in front, buyers pay in the back. They place their wares next to the goods, and wait for them to collect their wares before taking them. This was called the ghost market translation. Sellers set out their wares for buyers to choose from. After making their selections, buyers place their money next to the goods and leave. If the sellers took their money, the buyers could take the goods after their visit. This kind of market, where buyers could not see each other at all, was called a ghost market by the Tang people. The existence of the ghost market suggests two things. 1. Byzantine merchants were incredibly busy. They didn't even have time to stop at a single shop. They were constantly moving between them, collecting payments and delivering goods. Business was booming too. The people of this country were known for their high integrity, never stealing. Even the Tang people were amazed by this. The 8th century AD was a time when religious rituals dominated everything. Yet, at this time, the Byzantine Empire even had an Academy of Sciences, a fact that still amazes Loki. After all, Byzantium was one of the holy cities of the Holy Patriarch, housing the Pope and the 12 temples of the Holy Lord. Under such circumstances, the imperial court of Constantinople could establish a state-funded Academy of Sciences, something Loki had never imagined. It's no wonder that, while many Western scholars unanimously acknowledge that Tang Dynasty Chang'an was the world's greatest city, the Byzantine capital, Constantinople, was not far behind in terms of cultural and religious heritage. 20 years after his time travel, Loki finally encountered a living person from the big city. After politely requesting to examine the volume behind the girl, he discovered it contained hundreds of pages of maps, depicting plants, animals, Vikings, Slavic warriors, and more. Using precise perspective, the girl meticulously documented every detail of Scandinavia he could come into contact with. While her records lacked the precision and lavishness of Mohicans, her sketches on papyrus, using soft charcoal pencil, were equally vivid. Each drawing was meticulously proportioned, from the large-scale direwolves, bear men, and tundra rhinos to the smallest details, including flowers, plants, and even some unknown beetles. 3 large notebooks, totaling hundreds of pages. Loki flipped through a few pages before returning them to the girl. Her mottled hands indicated that her life was clearly not as comfortable as that of the other noblewoman beside her. At only 19, Her hands were already covered in calluses and furrows. Since Lord O'Sullivan has spoken, as a subject, how dare I disobey? But I must say that we are, after all, a poor village, and our sailing conditions are no match for your Byzantine warships, not to mention that this is an expedition sailing north. Compared to the vast ocean, the power of mortals is truly too small. If anything were to happen, and your distinguished friend were harmed, Loki hesitated and stopped talking. After all, cursing a friend in front of a distinguished princess, who might die at sea, was unlucky in every way. However, what Loki didn't expect was that Emma Waldorf resolutely revealed the emblem on her chest. It was a brass badge, with a portrait of a white-bearded old man engraved in the center, and a few Greek letters at the bottom that Loki barely recognized. I am a member of the Royal Academy of Sciences, and my faith is in Mr. Socrates. We mages must use rational thought and explore the world based on the principle of seeking truth from facts. Sooner or later, we will free humanity from the deception of the gods. Emma, a Byzantine, wasn't yet fluent in Viking. But her words were still powerful and resolute. Loki was dumbfounded, while the noble woman behind Emma, Merindin, shook her head helplessly. Please forgive me, Mr. Loki. My friend is a fanatic. The word fanatic was unfamiliar to Loki. In the long 20 years, he had only heard it a few times, and each time, it was accompanied by teasing and ridicule. People are all utilitarian. If believing in a true God could bring power, 99% of humanity would believe in the true God. However, in this medieval world, there were still a few eccentrics who did not believe in the new God chosen by the people. A small number pursue the old evil gods, praying to inherit their legacy. Still others believe in no gods at all. For example, Emma Waldorf's Socrates. Though older than many of the new gods now roaming the continent, born in 475 BCE, over 400 years older than Christ, he was originally a common man in an ancient Greek city-state. He dedicated his life to spreading wisdom and science, but in his 70s, for blasphemy and defying the traditional church, he was poisoned and killed. In the blind and benighted early days of human civilization, this was one of the few awakened beings with clear vision. But he ultimately did not establish a sect or become a god. This is the faith of the blind believers. Their faith offers no upgrade path, nor does it alter their bodies in any way to make them inherently more powerful. In the Middle Ages, they were universally considered mad and foolish, and many lords even slaughtered them out of fear, believing them to be seduced by evil gods. Seeing the girl's rather shabby clothing and the calloused hands, Loki instinctively knew that she must have sacrificed a great deal to uphold her faith. Having lived 2 lives, he knew the difficulty of trudging forward with the torch in the darkness. He felt immense respect for this young woman who had abandoned her family's wealth and prosperity to embark on a scientific expedition into the uninhabited wilderness. 700 years later, the Renaissance would arrive. People would re-examine the humanistic spirit of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Science, once considered heresy, would be transformed into the primary productive force. And it was during the Dark Middle Ages that the spark of science was nurtured by countless fanatics like this girl. They were true pioneers of their time. In the future, these so-called madmen would change the planet. Chapter 84, Merrington O'Sullivan. Miss Emma, with the distinguished royal family intervening, I will not refuse your request. But I must be upfront about something, Loki said earnestly, gazing into the explorer's eyes. Upon closer inspection, he discovered a rather delicate young woman. While her features weren't breathtakingly beautiful, her light leather armor and the resolute, stubborn expression between her brows lent her a certain heroic air. The dark sea holds countless dangers. While I'm relatively safe compared to those lunatics piloting longships, the risks of heading north into unexplored territory are still immense. In other words, I'm not entirely confident I can bring you back safely, Loki said, speaking truthfully. The vast ocean is full of unexpected events, storms, groundings, sea monster attacks, even getting lost. Any of these could scupper the entire fleet. But Emma didn't hesitate. She clutched the Socrates badge on her chest and nodded firmly. She had her reasons for wanting to go. Over the past century, the Royal Academy's explorations had expanded to encompass multiple continents, fueled by the holy bishop's missionary work. However, the Norwegian Sea north of Scandinavia, long uninhabited, remained a blank slate on the map. Regardless of what the fleet discovered, she was the farthest northward explorer of the Royal Academy. Our voyage will take at least a month, and possibly 3 to 5 months before we return. During this time, if we don't find a source of fresh water, No one will be allowed to wash or bathe. That means you'll be living with a group of men who smell like beasts for 3 months. Can you endure that? Emma nodded again. Living conditions on an ocean-going vessel are far worse than in the Conqueror's fortress. Most of the time, we rely on the fish we catch from our nets. We eat whatever we catch. Can you endure eating fish every day for 3 months? Emma nodded again. Loki smiled wryly and shook his head. With such an ancestor on board, she was also a friend of the O'Sullivan family. It would be best if this hot potato could be passed on. After all, his true purpose in this voyage was to search for Leviathan. If he did find it, he couldn't quite imagine how this medieval scientist would react. But now he knew the girl before him was a person of immense determination. Someone like her wouldn't be swayed by a few threats. After the brief meeting, the servants showed Emma around the castle, leaving Loki and Princess Marindin alone. Marindin called the casual butler to unload 10 large boxes from the shelves at the back of the carriage. After placing them all inside Coldwater Castle, she instructed the servants to unpack them one by one. The Waldorfs are a prominent family in Constantinople. They have close ties with my O'Sullivan family and serve as a link between our remote nation and the outside world. Therefore, I hope Miss Emma's daily life and safety are adequately guaranteed. Loki stared wide-eyed at the contents of the 10 large boxes, then looked hesitantly at Marindin. The boxes were neatly stacked with a variety of beautifully packaged luxury goods: Iberian ham from the Iberian Peninsula, tea from the Wamfuchsen tea house in the Eastern Tang dynasty, spices from the Middle East, citrus fruits and lemons from the Apennine Peninsula, still not fully dried at this time, pale golden olive oil and deep red wine. These 10 boxes of food alone were worth hundreds of silver coins. Furthermore, Marindin had the butler hand Loki a bulging animal hide bag. Loki took it, found it unusually heavy, and upon opening it, he saw that it was filled entirely with gold dinars from Constantinople, nearly 100 of them. These 10 boxes of food are a gift from the Conqueror's Fortress branch of the Izumo Trading Company to Miss Emma. They are her personal belongings, and I hope the captain will protect her personal property while on board. These gold coins are an advance payment to you. Marindin made the word advance clear. I hope to send her directly back to the Conqueror's Fortress on your return voyage. If you allow this young lady to satisfy her sailing cravings and stop clamoring for more, I will pay you, in the name of the Izumo Trading Company, 3 times the balance, 300 Constantinople dinars. Loki's ears perked up at this remark. A total of 400 gold coins, round trip? What a concept. At the Viking exchange rate, 1 gold coin could be exchanged for 10 silver coins. That was a considerable fortune. But I also want you to understand clearly that you must not let her suffer any injustice. If I hear that your crew dares to plot against him or endanger Miss Emma's safety in any way, I wouldn't mind subjecting you to the O'Sullivan family's blood eagle torture. With that, Marindin said nothing more. Even with her current status as a princess, and her position as a partner of the Tang Izumo Trading Company in Conqueror's Fortress, Loki's current social status was still far, far inferior to hers. After completing all her tasks, she set off that afternoon for Blood Pigeon Town, next to Hanshu village. Old Man Hummel operated the largest sea salt drying field in the Eastern Peninsula and was her partner. Blood Pigeon Town only produced salt, but the most lucrative salt trade had long been controlled by the O'Sullivan family. This rare visit to the river valley made it necessary for her to visit Blood Pigeon Town and inspect this year's new salt. Only 10 boxes of cargo, and Emma, a living being, remained. Loki patted his cheek gently, trying to cheer himself up. This young woman was indeed a hot potato, but she was a very valuable hot potato. As long as there was money to be made, any burden could be overcome. Another eye-opener for him was the Viking princess, Marindin herself. Scandinavia at that time was essentially a textbook example of a slave society, yet, in such a primitive social environment, the royal family members were surprisingly no different from the CEOs of 21st century listed companies. They too needed to constantly shuttle between various business circles, maintain relationships with various forces, and inspect goods from their workshops. Their lives were nothing like the extravagant life of feasting and drinking described in ancient texts. Through his meeting with Marindin, he had a basic understanding of the O'Sullivan family's fundamental basis for survival in these turbulent times. Plunder was only a small part of the struggle for hegemony, important for small villages, but not crucial for larger families. The O'Sullivan family's foundation lay, I'm afraid, in fact, in its strong economic foundation. Trade is the foundation on which this maritime civilization depends for its survival. Chapter 85 Setting Sail. Before the fleet set sail, Jerome and all the believers of the Coldwater Village Cathedral carried aloft a pristine white cross and transported it to Loki's three-masted ship docked at the pier. The Holy Cross is a sacred relic of the Holy Bishop. Expanding territory and spreading the teachings of the Holy Lord Christ has always been a key way for the Holy Church to demonstrate its strength. Our church may be small, but the faith of all believers in dispelling darkness for the Holy Lord is no less than that of larger churches. All the believers of the Coldwater Village Evangelical Church participated in the crafting of this cross, and ultimately, it will be carried on the back of Brother Lawrence Nightingale and planted in the land of the New World. On the deck of the three-masted ship, Jerome solemnly handed the cross to Lawrence. Lawrence was a chosen one of the Holy Light Path. He served as the ship's doctor and the only monk from the Holy Church accompanying the fleet on the expedition. The cross stood approximately 1.8 meters tall and was made entirely of century-old pine wood. Lawrence took the cross and tied it to his back with a 10-foot-long white cloth. For the rest of his journey, until he discovered the New World, he would carry the cross on his back, taking great care to prevent it from touching the ground. Loki stood by and did not interfere. Religion was all about freedom. He simply stipulated that everyone had the right to freely worship, and left the rest to their own devices. Moreover, during the defense of Frostwater Village, Jerome had played a vital role in preserving the village. Even if he wanted to place 10 crosses, let alone one, Loki wouldn't object. After the cross was loaded onto the ship, the last items to be loaded were Emma Waldorf's 10 large chests. By the time Emma's 10 chests were loaded onto the ship's waterline had reached a precarious point. The Viking crew, adhering to the ancient Scandinavian custom of smearing animal blood on the figurehead before setting sail, believed that every ship was alive. The purpose of smearing the beast's blood was to ensure the ships were well fed, ensuring they remained strong and stable in the vast ocean. All the villagers of Frostwater Village spontaneously set out to see the warriors off. After the battle with Foggy Duck, the fame of Blood Axe Loki and White Robe Jerome spread throughout the valley. Loki was undoubtedly a lord unlike any other. On his previous voyage, he had not embezzled his wealth for personal enjoyment, but instead dedicated all his earnings to the development of the village. When the village faced danger, he did not abandon his people and flee. Instead, he took up arms and fought bravely. The Vikings of the Middle Ages might have been ignorant, but they still knew whether their lords were good or evil. Everyone stood in a neat formation on the shore, their index fingers curled and gently tapped their foreheads. Jerome led the monks in devout prayer, waiting until the two ships disappeared over the horizon before silently departing. As soon as they set sail, Loki immediately noticed the slowdown. On his previous voyage, the three-masted ship had only 10 Viking warriors and very limited provisions aboard. This time, however, both ships were fully loaded. Despite the strong spring breeze, the heavy vessels had inadvertently slowed their speed. Loki calculated that the ships were likely traveling at only 15 to 20 kilometers per hour. The slow speed was only one factor. Worse still, he had no idea where the island of Iceland lay. Based on the fuzzy world map in his mind, Iceland was farther from Scandinavia than England, but not much further. Certainly not twice as far. Therefore, based on the ship's speed, he should have discovered the island within 4 to 5 days of setting sail. If not, the ships must have strayed from their course. 4 days later, Loki emerged from the captain's cabin and noticed that his breath was already emitting a white breath. This indicated that, with the increase in dimensionality, he was approaching the Arctic Circle. If Iceland existed in this dimension, it would be somewhere in this region. Loki acted decisively and ordered the ships to turn west. After 3 days, they would return and conduct a thorough search along the serpentine route. This was the only solution Loki could think of. The mast of a three-masted ship was only a little over 20 meters high, and a lookout atop it could only see within a radius of 5 kilometers at best. He desperately wished he had chosen one of the Eagle Path from the Halloran Temple under his command. They piloted falcons, said to be able to soar thousands of meters above the ground. Using such a person as a scout would be far more powerful than the sword cultivators of the Eastern Tang dynasty. 3 days passed, and no land had been found, only the weather was gradually warming. Loki stared speechlessly at the Xenon instrument on the ship, feeling it was far less effective than the popular science programs claimed. The slightest jolt of the ship in the sea would cause the spoon-shaped Xenon to sway wildly, significantly disrupting his bearings. Sometimes it would even point in the wrong direction. For navigation, the rising and setting of the sun during the day and the North Star at night were still the most effective. Turning and heading in the opposite direction, Loki resumed his search. He sailed for 4 full days, seeing no land except icebergs and reefs. This made him doubt his memory. Iceland wasn't just a tiny island like Hainan Island or Taiwan on a map. It was a country whose combined land area was probably no smaller than Japan. Such a large island, anchored in the sea, shouldn't be undiscoverable by his serpentine search. Could it be that Iceland in this dimension didn't exist? Compared to Loki's anxiety, the happiest person on board was the newly arrived Emma Waldorf. As an explorer and biologist, her greatest joy was discovering creatures she had never seen before. Her hometown, Constantinople, lay at the intersection of Europe and Asia, between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Its warm climate and pleasant environment were a world apart from the bitter cold of Scandinavia, and the creatures there bore no resemblance at all. Loki's 2 ships didn't carry many women. Emma and Aunt Valrhona shared a room. The 19-year-old girl immediately won the affection of the crew with her vast array of luxuries. She included Iberian smoked ham from the Iberian Peninsula, French wine, rich Burgundy cheese, and spices and tea from the Eastern Tang dynasty. Rather than hoarding them for herself, she generously shared them with everyone on board. 10 large boxes of supplies were devoured within a week. She then asked Aunt Valrhona to capture numerous large creatures native to these frigid waters. From small, bioluminescent fish and shrimp to large, ice-floating seals, walruses, and horn whales, she meticulously observed their forms and habits, diligently sketching them on papyrus with charcoal. From the smallest details, from the smallest organs to the smallest, she created precise, 2-scale illustrations, which were then bound into a book. Loki discovered that this person was like the obsessive programmers he'd met in his previous life. Once she got into work, she could forego food or drink, regardless of day or night. She even leaned halfway over the side of the ship several times, just to catch seabirds nesting on the ice floes. After a few brief conversations, Loki understood the reason for this girl's devotion. Royal Academy of Constantinople. These words might sound quite sophisticated to a modern person. However, in the benighted Middle Ages, the Academy was still undeniably a lowly institution. In the eyes of the behemoth that was the Holy Church, the Academy was far from being an enemy. In the eyes of the masses, those who blindly believed in Socrates were mostly lunatics. Consequently, the influence of the word science was extremely limited. Many of the Academy's explorations were carried out in conjunction with the Holy Church's search for the Old Ones. Scientists earned the opportunity to join the Crusaders and conduct research through humble submission, while countless mortal scholars, unarmed and without any means, perished along the voyage. My predecessors begged the Crusaders to accept their useless cannon fodder. My starting point is much better than theirs. At least I grew up in a wealthy family. My parents are prominent figures in Constantinople. With my family's reputation, even if I don't do anything, I'll have plenty of people to do my bidding. Compared to my predecessors who perished in humble circumstances, why shouldn't I, with my lucky start, fight tooth and nail? Chapter 86 Living Sacrifice. Emma cherished this rare scientific expedition. In her mind, it was a precious journey even the rich could not afford. After all, lords like Loki were rare, if not rare. In an era where 99% of humanity never left their homeland, she didn't believe she would ever encounter another opportunity to undertake a scientific expedition into the Arctic Circle. Consequently, she barely slept. If it weren't for Aunt Fafnir stuffing food into her mouth a few times, Loki would have worried she would faint from hypoglycemia. Time slipped by in the aimless, S-shaped curves. 20 days later, with the ship's freshwater supply nearly half depleted, Loki first began to consider returning when the observer on the mainmast suddenly rang the alarm bell. Night had already fallen. Lamp held high as he emerged from the captain's cabin, Loki saw a large crew gathered on the port side of the 3-masted ship. Their eyes were fixed on a dark reef. In the distance, a cross stood erect in its center. If one squinted and looked more closely, the cross was now faintly visible, seemingly dangling upside down from a bloody corpse. The crew fell silent. The ship was still some distance from the reef. The holy light radiated by the only saint master of the path of holy light Loki had brought with him, due to his sequence level, couldn't reach that far. After much deliberation, Loki decided to go alone. But explorer Emma couldn't miss such a rare opportunity. After she drew her dagger and practically threatened her life, Loki had no choice but to accede to the living Buddha's request. After all, that thing didn't look alive at all. They lowered a light wooden canoe from the three-masted ship's port side and, after paddling nearly 100 meters across the icy sea, they finally reached the reef. "Let me go first. At least wait until I'm sure it's not alive, then you can go." "That's fine, right?" Emma nodded helplessly. Loki held a hurricane lantern high and advanced cautiously. As a time traveler, baptized by countless zombie movies, he was far more alert to corpses than the natives of this plane. After advancing 20 meters, he finally stood before the cross. Closer inspection revealed that bound to the cross was a living being, his entire body practically frozen solid. He was naked, yet bore no visible wounds. The figure was extremely thin. It was unclear whether this was due to natural thinness or post-mortem drying. A thin layer of snow covered his body. Loki wiped it away, revealing the skin beneath. It was surprisingly dark brown. If my memory serves me correctly, how could this person look so similar to the Native Americans I remember from the American continent? Wiping away the frost and snow covering his body, Loki discovered that the man's body temperature was unusually cold. As more skin was exposed, he saw numerous patterns painted in black, white, and red. His ears and lips were adorned with black earrings and lip studs made of an unknown metal. That's right, based on the documentaries depicting Mayan and Aztec civilizations, Americans of this era should have looked like this. But the American continent lies across the vast Atlantic Ocean. How did these bizarre-looking Indians get transported to this desolate Norwegian sea? Emma Waldorf, already unable to contain her excitement, followed. However, upon seeing the chalk-covered face, she immediately uttered three words: "Live sacrifice." "What's a live sacrifice?" Loki asked, turning around. Emma walked over to Loki and hastily pulled him away from the South American native. "This is a living sacrifice. Every one of them is alive," Emma said solemnly. According to the records of the Royal Academy of Sciences of Constantinople, in the distant New World, there exists a unique civilization. Everyone in this civilization is born the chosen one. All of these people start at sequence 9 from birth. And the sequence 9 is called a living sacrifice. In this dimension, the mad monks of the Holy Bishop had already discovered the American continent across the Atlantic Ocean in order to spread their faith. In the previous life, human civilization's records of the Americas only began with Columbus's discovery of the New World in 1492. How did Native Americans live in the 7th century AD? Archaeologists can only rely on ancient relics and fragments unearthed from underground archaeological excavations to draw their conclusions. However, in this life, a Native American was placed before him. "You say, this thing is alive," Loki expressed deep out. According to Xiaolu's notes in his notebook, he did mention that they would leave coordinates along the way after entering the Great Cold Sea, also known as the Norwegian Sea. If this living being nailed to the cross is the coordinate they left behind, he'd been hanging there for nearly 50 years, without food or water. Even if he were a deity, he'd probably starved to death. "Living sacrifices are a species completely different from normal humans," Emma said sternly, not taking any chances. "They have a variety of uses. Besides being sacrificed to the Mayan deity Quetzalcoatl, they're also said to be very useful in everyday life. According to the Royal Academy of Sciences, living sacrifices are somewhere between animals and plants. They require minimal water and sunlight to survive. High-sequence living sacrifices can even go without food or water, enduring scorching heat and bitter cold, working in places unbearable for normal humans. Another theory is that these things serve as sustenance for the gods, who, as the gods of old, particularly enjoy consuming high-sequence living sacrifices. Emma's voice was low, but it sent a chill through Loki's ears. He bravely raised his axe. He walked forward, gently parted the living sacrifice's eyelids, and held the lantern closed to examine them. Beneath the eyelids lay a pale eyeball. A mere second later, a pale golden, feline-like pupil rolled out from the other side of the eyeball. The living sacrifice slowly opened its eyes. The next second, its mouth widened to a shape barely proportional to its head. Then, its voice vibrated, and a deep, furious roar erupted from the depths of its parched throat. A mortal using the vibrations of their Adam's apple could not produce such penetrating, sub-sounds. The living sacrifice's vocalizations were clearly based on a different principle. Loki, the first to be struck by the sound waves, felt as if every cell in his body was vibrating under the influence of the sound waves. The living sacrifice's voice, in the space of a few seconds, shifted from a low, throat-like bass to a high-pitched treble. The sound waves, traveling at a speed of 380 meters per second across the deserted ocean, instantly traveled immense distances. About a minute later, a shrill roar echoed from the other side of the distant sea. A minute later, another sound came from behind. The shrieks echoed through the sky, reaching ever farther and farther. It was actually using sound waves to point Loki in a direction. He finally understood the purpose of this living sacrifice. These things, arranged in an array, were actually used by the ancients for positioning. Chapter 87 Frozen Sea. Using the cries of a living sacrifice to determine direction? In the Middle Ages, when the compass was just beginning to appear and GPS was still a distant dream, the people would resort to every possible means. Frankly, this tactic was completely unheard of and shocking to Loki. But it was undeniably very practical. The long series of howling cries proved that the figure on the cross was indeed still alive. After observing closely for a full 10 minutes, Loki determined that aside from the roaring, the figure displayed no overt aggression. After much deliberation, he decided to lower it and bring it back to the ship for further study. This was certainly to Emma's liking. After all, the Royal Academy of Sciences had been established for over 200 years, and the existence of such a rare creature as a living sacrifice was only documented in literature. Across all the countries of the Western continent, only a handful of captains dared to cross the Atlantic to the New World each year. Limited by their limited navigational skills, the vast majority of these ships sank to the icy bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, with only a handful ever reaching the other side. Even upon arrival, they would face numerous challenges: savage beasts, deep rainforests, a humid and sweltering climate, and relentless pursuit by primitive tribes. Live sacrifices were precious currency in Mayan civilization, and each one successfully transported from the New World was priceless. The highest officials of all major religions, such as the fire priests of Zoroastrianism or the cardinals of the Holy Episcopal Church, all harbored an uncanny desire for live sacrifices. Some followers of evil deities were willing to sacrifice everything just to obtain a live sacrifice to offer to their masters. This was the ultimate food for the gods. Perhaps only the secretive Illuminati, or the amorphous Tang dynasty, could utilize live sacrifices in this way. Loki pondered as he untied the strange figure from the cross. He stood there blankly, showing no desire to attack. To be on the safe side, Loki bound his hands behind his back, tied them with ropes, and carried them back to the bark. After boarding the ship, the entire crew instinctively gathered around this strange figure. For most Vikings, the furthest they had ever traveled was the Slavic lands east of the Baltic Sea. A brown-haired English monk was already a rarity, let alone this South American living sacrifice whose skin color and attire bore little resemblance to them. Loki's interest lay in how this man had managed to survive for so many years on this frigid, icy sea, without food or water. Even the remarkably resilient moss would have dried trash after being hung on a cross for so long. Yet, this living man's heart was still beating. Upon subsequent observation, Loki discovered part of the reason. The living sacrifice had lost all bodily functions except for roaring. He had a mouth, but could not eat. He had limbs, but the muscles in them had completely atrophied, withered like hard cotton wool. Consequently, he was unable to walk. Under normal circumstances, his eyes remained permanently closed. Only when forced open would his pupils bulge, releasing a howl that unnerved everyone. For this living sacrifice, it was difficult to call him a living being. He was like the zombies in those zombie movies Loki had seen in his previous life. The only difference was that zombies could eat humans, while this creature could howl. It was a strange creature somewhere between animal, plant, and mechanical. Could it be that the Quetzalcoatl ruling South America at this time was also some unique extraterrestrial civilization similar to the Bloody Creator? Loki couldn't answer this question yet. With a living sacrifice, finding the way became easier. The creature's howl, driven by unknown mechanism, could be carried through the air for immense distances. Another living sacrifice, hearing the sound, also uttered the same piercing howl. This allowed Loki to roughly determine his location. Following the howling of the living sacrifice, Loki sailed for a full 10 days. After 3 days, the sea ice continued to grow, and Loki felt as if he were gradually returning from the warmth of spring to the bitter cold of winter. On the 4th day, he found the second living sacrifice bound to the cross. This man appeared taller and larger than the first one Loki had freed from the cross. Otherwise, he was half dead, existing in a state somewhere between animal and plant, much like the one on the ship. Perhaps he would need him for guidance on the return voyage, so Loki left him alone. 2 days later, he found the third living sacrifice. Unlike the first two, this one was a woman. However, her appearance was no longer recognizable as a woman, and her voice was not noticeably different from the previous two men. Large areas of floating ice had begun to form on the sea surface, accompanied by numerous icebergs. These massive blocks of ice, which had fallen from Greenland, drifted on the surface, the largest of which was nearly 100 meters tall. The Viking crew commanding Loki used the floating icebergs to replenish their ship's water supply. Thanks to Aunt Valrina's increasingly skilled fishing skills, they temporarily replenished their supplies. With no worries about food and clothing, he even anchored his ship near an iceberg, crushed the ice, and boiled enough water for everyone at sea after nearly a month of seafaring to take a bath. He also washed their clothes, which hadn't been washed in a long time. Emma took some remaining lemons and oranges, soaked them in water, and had the crew drink the hot water before eating. This was said to be a method developed by the Royal Academy of Sciences to prevent fatigue and malnutrition. After a 2-day rest, they set out again. The sea was almost completely covered in scattered ice, and the temperature dropped even lower, even dropping below zero at night. A layer of floating ice formed on the surface of the city. Loki had to use his 3-masted ship to lead the way, thanks to its prow blade. This design allowed the ship's heavy mast to cut through the newly formed ice and carve a path. Using this method, they sailed for another 2 days until they finally reached the frozen ocean. As far as the eye could see, it was a world of pure white. Vast cracks dotted the frozen surface. The living sacrifice on the driving ship howled again, and Loki could hear a follow-up cry on the horizon. However, this layer of black ice, tens of meters thick, was too much for Loki's wooden boat to break through. To move forward, he had to unleash the ship's sled dogs and use a sled like the ancient Eskimos. Loki glanced hesitantly at the sun in the sky. Today's sun would rise above the horizon for just 3 hours before setting again. Such a short daylight period indicated that they were approaching the Arctic Circle. He didn't know exactly where this was, but he knew this was definitely not the Iceland he remembered. In a previous life, Loki had a friend who had visited this country. In June and July, Iceland should have temperatures of at least 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, not below freezing like it was now. He must be within the Arctic Circle. An answer occurred to him, perhaps the answer to this question. If Leviathan, or Kun, as Zhuangzi called it, is the land of Iceland, and if this plane is the earth where he lived in his previous life, then there is only one explanation for the current situation. Leviathan is still alive. At some point in the future, it will awaken again and crawl to the location of Iceland in his memory. Chapter 88 The Last Person in the Array. The primary purpose of this northbound voyage was to search for the remaining ships of Xiaolu's expedition. The sea, frozen solid by ice, was visible, but no ship was in sight. This was not a good sign. However, the living sacrifice had pointed in the right direction. The next howl came from within the ice. Loki knew it was time for him, the captain, to make a decision. After all the hardships he had come to, it would be unacceptable not to go ashore and investigate. After a few minutes of brief deliberation, he decided to unleash the sled dogs toward the source of the sound, to see what lay beneath the smooth ice. With only 12 sled dogs and 2 sleds, the limited transport space meant that most of the crew would remain on board. The nearby sea was rich in fish, and the glaciers common on land were formed by frozen fresh water. With a ship anchored here, food and water would not be lacking. The sky was now filled with stars. After the Vikings loaded the sled with plenty of food and water, dog biscuits for the sled dogs, and ravens for communication, Loki realized there was only room for 5 more. Ultimately, Loki, Emma, the ship's doctor, Lawrence Nightingale, and the nearly suicidal old man, Gormarish, accompanied him on the journey. 4 of the 5 were chosen ones, plus an explorer. Of course, there was also the living sacrifice on board, responsible for shouting. This series of high-pitched cries accurately pointed Loki in the direction he was going, a far superior tool to compass in an age without GPS. It's worth noting that the ship's doctor, Lawrence, had been carrying the massive cross on his back throughout the journey, and now, up on board in the sled, he didn't put it down, choosing to continue carrying it forward. The glory of the Holy Lord will eventually illuminate this dark continent. Then, the name of our Hanshu Village Evangelical Church will be hailed by all the Holy Lord's brethren, Lawrence explained, and Loki remained silent. With the crew's farewell, The expedition officially began. After nearly a month of confinement in the ship's hold, the sled dogs, finally free to stretch their muscles, were refreshed and tirelessly galloping. 6 dogs pulled a sled, reaching speeds of nearly 20 kilometers per hour. They raced for nearly the entire night, finally stopping at sunrise the next day. Looking around, Loki saw that after a night of running, they were still on a smooth surface of ice. There were no caves or vegetation, only endless, flat ice and a few frozen hills. The sun, after surfacing, merely circled the horizon before sinking back beneath the frozen ground. Loki's instincts told him that, if not within the Arctic Circle, they were probably not far from it. The sled dogs had been running for nearly 6 hours. They needed a rest, and after 6 hours of sitting in the uncomfortable sled, exposed to the cold wind, Loki felt on the verge of collapse. However, the frozen sea offered nothing. They could only find shelter at the foot of an iceberg. Then they encountered another problem: there was no firewood. In the freezing temperatures of around -30 degrees Celsius, humans needed a campfire to rest. Otherwise, if they fell asleep in the icy conditions, their chances of waking would depend on the will of the gods above. Desperate, Loki chopped up a large wooden box on the sled, then tied the hands and feet of his living sacrifice with ropes to form a large bowl and placed the supplies inside. This way, they barely made it through the first night. When they awoke, the chop box had already burned. The chilly night wind kept the 4 men shivering, and they slept for only a few hours. Huddled in his bearskin, Loki pondered for a long time. Should he turn back? His situation was now much better than it had been at the start. Coldwater Village had recently annexed Foggy Duck Town, and he had the men and money he needed, along with 2 ocean-going sailboats. According to the typical online game process, he had already completed a dungeon and obtained his first purple item, ready to unleash his might. Was it really worth it to suffer in this icy hell? But then he thought, I've come this far on this ocean voyage. Perhaps if I persevere a little longer, I'll find the ancient city recorded in my notebook. He was reluctant to give up. After waking up, everyone quickly patted their bodies to warm up. After a good night's rest and food, the sled dogs regained their strength, and the group set out again, following the roar of the sacrifice. This run lasted another 8 hours. After 8 hours, all they could see was still ice. Loki and his companions' enthusiasm plummeted. They realized the sacrifice's howling was actually coming from right below them. Bringing the torch closer to the ice, Loki could vaguely see a shadowy figure frozen beneath the ice in the dim light. Only after the ship's doctor, Nightingale, cast a holy light spell did he see that the sacrifice had been frozen beneath 5 meters of ice. The faint light from the torches couldn't penetrate the thick ice, but the holy light spell could. Lying on the ice, he could see the sacrifice's cross embedded in a snow-white iceberg. The sacrifice, the cross, and the iceberg were all embedded in the ice. Yet, even in this environment, the sacrifice still managed to vibrate its Adam's apple and howl. Loki had a cursory knowledge of the legends of the Mayan civilization. They were unparalleled in astronomical observation, even inventing the number 0. Their understanding of basic mathematics and physics far surpassed that of any other civilization of their time. Later excavations of pyramid murals contain numerous records of ancient aircraft. Scientists have even created one replicas based on the scale of the aircraft depicted in the murals. The bizarre aircraft were surprisingly aerodynamic. The mysterious sacrifice in this dimension indeed possessed extraordinary qualities. Aside from the living sacrifice beneath the ice, what made everyone even more pessimistic was the lack of any other sounds coming from the front. They urged the living sacrifice beside them to shout, but aside from the one beneath the ice, there was a dead silence ahead, no sound at all. The dark, empty frozen sea was broken only by the occasional blast of a biting, cold wind. Beyond that, it was a desolate wasteland devoid of life. "Boss, do you want me to use my hammer to dig that old fellow out from under the ice?" Of the 5, Emma and Old Man Gore maintained the same enthusiasm they had when they first set out. Loki waved his hand, leaning closer to the ice, deep in thought. Judging by the pattern of the previous living sacrifices, when Xiaolu's fleet first entered this area, it should have been a flowing ocean. Perhaps, after 10 years, the cooling temperature has frozen this sea frozen as well? There's a saying that the permafrost within the Arctic Circle regulates global climate. When the weather gets too hot, the ice melts, and when it gets cold, it refreezes. If this is the case, combined with the fact that there are no more cries of living sacrifice coming from the front, their fleet is most likely just ahead. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 89 must return tomorrow. Atop the frozen sacrifice, the men managed another night. That night, Loki smashed a wooden crate from another sled. 2 nights had consumed a vast amount of their food, and the sled no longer needed so much storage space. With this last crate, the 4 men and 12 dogs found a sheltered reef. There, they built a bonfire and cooked the food, now nearly frozen solid, to fill their stomachs. After their food was consumed, everyone fell asleep. Only Loki remained awake, staring at the flames that seemed to be about to die. With his crate gone, they had consumed all the wood on the sled. Any more would only burn the sled. Even if they returned here, they would need to sleep for a night cuddled by their sled dogs to avoid freezing to death. Continuing forward would exponentially increase the dangers they faced. Although Xiaolu's fleet should be anchored nearby, without the howling of the sacrifice to guide them, he had no idea where it was. Without navigation, he could only resort to the oldest and most ruthless method to find the fleet, commanding the sled dogs to run in an S-shaped pattern, expanding the search area as much as possible. But this approach still carried risks. There were no trees on the frozen sea, and no fires to build for warmth. Even if the dogs' body heat could barely keep them warm, they would eventually give way. The 12 dogs on board were, after all, accustomed to Scandinavia. The even colder Arctic wasn't their home. Furthermore, even if they found Xiaolu's fleet, what if their ships, like the living sacrifices, were buried beneath the ice? What if they had no supplies? What if Loki could imagine 10,000 possible scenarios, each one of which could easily kill them all? If he were alone, carefree individual like in his previous life, he would have treated this adventure as a game, striving to solve the final puzzle. But now he was a lord. Following his lead were over 1,000 impoverished Vikings and Slavic serfs, living off the land. He couldn't die. Furthermore, Emma Waldorf was a hot potato in the group. It wouldn't be a big deal if someone else died, but she was a noble woman in Constantinople, a distinguished guest of the Viking princess, Marindin O'Sullivan. If this living Buddha died on his ship, he would surely face the wrath of the Viking royal family upon his return. This was something he couldn't bear. He reached out and poked the burning wood with his stone axe, then looked toward the dark sky in the distance and sighed helplessly. The next day, Loki had just expressed his desire to return, but he was met with unanimous opposition from his 3 companions. I object. Emma was the one with the strongest will to resist among all the people. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. Leave me some supplies and 6 sled dogs, and I can complete my mission alone. Now I am the person who has gone the farthest into the polar ice belt among the Royal Academy of Sciences of Constantinople. I need to find a way for future explorers. At the same time, I also need to bring back a token for the Byzantine King Mikhail III to let him continue to support the work of my academy. What I shoulder is not just my own life, but the honor of all explorers in the academy. Haha, I won't leave either, Old Man Gore said with a heavy breath, spitting out white mist. I finally made it out, spent half a month on the ship vomiting acid, and then spent several days frozen on this icy sea. This kind of adventure isn't the heroic story I want to tell the gods after my death. Little sister, keep going. I can be your bodyguard or something. Don't underestimate this hammer in my old man's hand. I can now summon lightning. The person who surprised Loki the most was the holy bishop Brother Lawrence Nightingale. He was clearly exhausted from carrying the heavy cross on his back for days, but even so, he refused to leave. I am a representative of the Hanshu Village Evangelical Church. Our church swore its existence to the Holy Lord through me. No matter how difficult the road ahead, I must complete the church's mission. I came here with a mission, so I will never leave. The subordinates expressed their convictions. Loki sighed, feeling a mixture of emotions. He had originally thought that if Emma was the only one who refused to leave, they could knock her unconscious and tie her back to the ship. But now, he was outmatched by 3, though he had the will. If a fight really came to a head, it was even possible that these 3 would work together to tie him up and put him on the cart. Furthermore, deep down, Loki wasn't willing to let this expedition end here. The road ahead would undoubtedly be much more difficult. Loki was almost certain that Xiaolu's fleet was not far away. But as they began searching along the S-shaped path across the ice, this destined method of travel, which was bound to waste a great deal of time, began to torment his soul. A day later, the 12 sled dogs were exhausted, and the men found a sheltered reef to sleep with the dogs. There was nothing left to burn. Another day passed, and fine snow powder, like sugar, began to fall across the endless ice. Loki looked back anxiously at the path they had come from, noticing that the tracks carved by the sleds had been largely obscured by the powder. All he could see was darkness. On the empty frozen sea, not even a hint of land, let alone ships, was visible. Loki felt the urge to retreat again. The reason was simple. Even with the howling of the sacrificial offering, they could still hear the cries of the one buried beneath the ice. If they moved any further, and once they could no longer hear the offering's cries, they would likely lose their acoustic positioning and be unable to find their way back to the ship. As a traverser, Loki always played it safe. As long as there was a shred of hope, he didn't want his journey to end in freezing to death in the Arctic Circle. That night, because the four had already consumed most of the food, Loki used his bloody axe to chop one of the sleds in half, leaving only enough space for 2 people. The remaining half was chopped into firewood. Gathered around the flames, the group and their 12 sled dogs devoured the warm food, feeling alive again. Aimlessly wandering the frozen ocean is no way. We've burned through the last of our firewood. There was nothing more to say. Tomorrow, we must return. Chapter 90 Desperate Situation. The next morning, Loki discovered he had been tied up tightly in his sleep. Furious, he struggled, only to find the ropes binding him cold and strong. Looking down, he saw he was bound with a thick, glassy chain. Old Gar had originally used this chain to secure the cargo on his sled. He had never imagined it would be used on him. Hey, boss, I'm sorry. Last night, the god King Odin appeared in my dream, saying that if I found this ancient city, I would accomplish unparalleled feats for him. All the gods in Valhalla are waiting for my ascension to tell them about this thrilling adventure, so, I can't let you go back. Just as Gore finished speaking, Emma beside him continued, I also dreamed of the great scholar Socrates. In the dream, he repeatedly recounted the arduous efforts of the ancient Greek sages to give birth to the word science in this ignorant society. The Royal Academy of Sciences inherits Socrates' legacy. Every one of us scientists and explorers has the obligation to use the principle of seeking truth from facts to help people gain a deeper understanding of this continent. I must find the land of eternal night in the far north. Loki felt a sense of foreboding. Qin Shi Huang, Northumbria, a world map identical to his memory, and the all-seeing Illuminati. All this evidence pointed to the continent he had traveled to in this life as the Earth of 1,300 years ago. The absence of Iceland suggests that the ancient god, Leviathan, is likely still alive. It's apparently using some form of mind control to control its subordinates. In other words, he shouldn't be far behind. I also saw the Holy Lord in my dreams. The Holy Lord Christ descended in a ball of holy light and instructed me to plant the Pope's flag on this unknown continent. The human pioneers who discovered the New World can only be followers of my holy bishop. Lawrence, struggling to advance with a cross on his back, was haggard, but his eyes still shone with an unyielding fire. Loki struggled to free himself, but he had clearly underestimated Old Gor's ability to bind people. In the Viking era, looting, tying up women and children, and then carrying them away was a skill ingrained in their DNA. Furthermore, the unknown, glass-like metal in the fallen Titan's hands was of excellent quality. The chains, combining both strength and toughness, were simply not something he could break free of with brute force. As the Chosen One, Loki's abilities were largely woven into the blood mist created by the blood that rose after he bled. Without it, his combat abilities were barely better than a normal human's. Gore laughed heartily, fetched him a bag of ale, and gulped it down. Boss, just get some sleep. When you wake up again, maybe we'll have found land. Then, Lawrence sealed his eyes, and Loki was instantly plunged into darkness. He struggled for a moment, but ultimately decided to conserve his strength. Undoubtedly, he was the only one of the 4 people in the sled who was still conscious. Perhaps the body of the Scarlet Creator had made him immune to mind control, or perhaps it was something else. Now, how to rescue his 3 companions became Loki's primary concern. For the rest of the day, Loki kept his eyes closed almost the entire time. It wasn't that he wanted to, but even if he did, he couldn't see anything because of the blindfold. He could sense the sled dogs' speed slowing significantly. After several days of running, the sled dogs began to tire. That night, while embracing the beasts for warmth, 2 of the outermost dogs froze to death. They lacked the ability to take turns standing at the outermost circle, as penguins do, so without a campfire and with the wind blowing with unusual ferocity, they were bound to lose men. Fortunately, the next morning, all 3 companions were still alive. As they emerged from the ice, everyone shared a look of bewilderment. Where am I? How did I end up sleeping on the ice? What's going on? Why did the leader tie us up? After regaining consciousness, the 3 men hurriedly helped Loki remove the chains. Freed, Loki's first act was to grab some food. He wolfed down a piece of frozen whole wheat bread, frozen like stone, and silently gazed at the 2 dead sled dogs. For a long time, he remained silent. The 3 companions hadn't been mired in hysteria for long. That was a good thing, but the worst news was that they couldn't return. The remaining food and sled dogs on the wagons weren't enough to sustain them back to shore. Their only hope of survival was to find Zaiolu's fleet and pray to the gods above that the ships still held the supplies they'd taken on their journey. Surely, in this hell of ice and snow, food wouldn't spoil. Another day later, 3 sled dogs died of exhaustion while running. Loki didn't waste any resources. On this barren, frozen sea, even a drop of blood must be conserved, to be converted into heat later. After the 3 sled dogs died, Loki cut off their flesh and entrails and smashed the remaining half of the sled wagon. The reason was simple: the remaining 7 dogs could no longer pull 2 wagons. They had also almost consumed all the supplies they had brought with them. Viking dog food was dog biscuits made from ground animal bones, dry bread crumbs, and animal offal. After running on the frozen sea for nearly a week, the dog biscuits were long gone. After killing the 3 dead sled dogs, Loki used the smashed half of the sled to light a campfire and cooked a large pot of soup. The sled dogs smelled their own kind and didn't want to eat, but they were so hungry that they could hardly move. When the cooked offal was thrown in front of them, they didn't hesitate and devoured it directly. After a hearty meal, the 4 people gathered around the campfire. No one spoke. Everyone knew what would happen if the journey continued in this way. There were still 7 dogs. What if they were not eaten? What to eat next? The firelight reflected on everyone's face, and no one spoke or slept. They sat around the fire for most of the night, and watched until the next day when the sun rose again. Chapter 91 Land. The next morning, they set out again, treading on the embers of the dying fire. After a day of struggling like the Walking Dead, they still faced an endless expanse of frozen sea. Loki and his 4 companions were completely out of ammunition and food. Tonight, after much reflection, Loki made a crucial decision. He decided to release the remaining 7 sled dogs from their harnesses and let them walk freely, allowing them to rest. The remaining distance would be completed by the 4 living men pulling the sled. This choice was a necessary evil. Exploring the new world wasn't a one-way journey. They still had to figure out how to return to shore. If all 7 sled dogs died from exhaustion, even if they eventually found Zaiolu's remaining fleet, their ships would be frozen in the ice, unable to sail. They would still rely on the dogs to return to their ships. It was imperative that the remaining dogs survived, both for hauling the cart and as food. The sleds were now running low on supplies. The food they'd taken from the ship had been completely consumed. The cart still contained a few bear skins for warmth, a can of kerosene for kindling, a few ravens for communication, and the cross Lawrence had always carried on his back. Despite his deep devotion to the holy bishop, days without food and water, coupled with wandering across the endless ice, had left him feeling exhausted. "Boss, do you think we can reach land alive?" The only person still alive and well was old Mangor. Though he was already in his 50s, the newly chosen one seemed to possess boundless strength. He used his dominant right arm to pull the sled behind him. Beside him, Loki pulled on another rope. "Damn it. I can't believe I'm saying that, but our lives are no longer in our own hands, haha. You've obtained the Thor's way, and I'm sure old Thor would be happy to hear your story. As for me, I'm not even sure I'm even human in my current state. After death, let alone Valhalla, I'm not even sure the guards will let me into Asgard." The 2 chanted intermittently, exerting all their strength to move across the endless, frigid ice. That afternoon, Emma collapsed. A little later, Lawrence also collapsed. Neither Loki nor Oldgor spoke, but silently tossed him onto the sled and continued pulling. After an unending mechanical journey, Loki felt his legs growing weaker, his steps growing heavier. His mind was groggy, and he had almost lost the ability to think. Looking back, he saw only 5 of the 7 sled dogs remained. As for when the 2 missing dogs disappeared, he had no idea. After moving like a zombie on the frozen sea for so long, his brain felt frozen, almost completely devoid of any ability to think. He could only keep moving forward. He couldn't stop. If he did, he would die that day, the sun set, never to rise again. Loki tied the soft steel rope around his chest and walked forward, eyes closed, like a boatman pulling a boat on a river. When was the last time he opened his eyes? Oh, open them and look. All he saw was the dark, frozen sea. As he walked, he felt his knees grow weaker and weaker, until they seemed to bend involuntarily into a half-kneeling position. Suddenly, the iron rope pulled him, and he stumbled to the ground. Looking back, he saw old Gore, finally exhausted, collapsing on the ice. He was the only one of the four who had set out still able to move. Loki sighed deeply. In that moment, he longed to lie flat on the ice and end it all. Days of pulling the cart had left him aching all over, and mentally exhausted. He lost track of how much time had passed in the endless night, or how far they had traveled across the ice. After falling face down, he didn't stand up again for a long time. The sky tonight was thick with dark clouds. The fading of the bright moon and stars. Loki turned his face upwards and slowly closed his eyes. He felt that if he died now, he wouldn't have too many regrets. Brother Alhei, I've avenged your blood. If you enter Valhalla, gods won't matter, I only want to find you and drink twice as much with you. Wow. Just then, a raven's cry echoed in his ears. Loki chuckled, brother, do you hear my call? Wow. The cawing of the ravens grew more and more intense, and Loki slowly closed his eyes. Legend has it that this is when the god King Odin greets his people, using ravens to guide their souls. But in the next second, he sat up, struggling to survive. Ravens? How could there be ravens on the sea? After brushing the ice from his cheek with his icy hands, Loki's eyes widened as he saw a massive raven standing before him. Dong, 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 its jet black beak pecked at the soles of his bearskin boots. He knew what he was seeing wasn't an illusion. Brother Gore, Miss Emma, he shouted at the top of his lungs, but his vocal cords were already cold from days of tireless pulling. Suddenly speaking, his voice only rasped, a raspy murmur. Ah! Ah! More and more crows approached, alerting the sled dogs. They barked at the crows, and Nightingale, the ship's doctor, who had been lying like a corpse on the sled for days, regained consciousness. He stretched his nearly frozen hands and softly recited the Holy Light Gospel. The Holy Lord Jehovah is the light of the world. Following him, mortals will escape darkness and bathe in the radiance of life. A soft holy light rose from between his hands, like a small flare. Across the vast frozen sea, Loki, using the faint light, finally spotted what appeared to be a tattered sail hanging near the horizon. And behind it, a long line of black mountains stretched out. Look! What's that? He shook old Gore vigorously, using the remaining strength in his hands to rouse him from his slumber. After days of slumber on the sled, Gore Marish had noticeably lost weight, but his spirits remained strong. Sitting up, old Gore rubbed his eyes vigorously. Boss. I'm not imagining it. That's a tattered sail. After enduring the long cold and hunger, old Gore's voice was like sawdust scraping against steel. That's land, ha ha ha. Even if I die tomorrow, I can still boast to the gods around me over a glass of ale that I once found land in the Arctic Sea. I'm considered the first among Vikings. Chapter 92 Lychee. Loki's heart was filled with mixed emotions. The four had endured countless hardships, and had been on the brink of despair several times. But in the end, whether by luck or some unspoken providence, they had finally found Xiaolu's fleet. For 50 years, the frozen sea had continued to spread. Even the closest living sacrifice to the fleet had been frozen to the bottom of the sea. Looking around, at least 7 or 8 massive ships were frozen along the entire coastline. Some had even tilted at a 60-degree angle, frozen almost to the surface. The largest was nearly 100 meters long. Run. Ha ha ha. Hold on a little longer. Finding the ship is half the battle, the haggard old man, Gore, summoned his remaining strength. He and Loki strained to pull the sled forward, a flock of black crows circling around them. It had been a long time since any living person had appeared near this land. The final stretch of the journey was nearly 1,000 meters long. As they approached the coast, they discovered that due to the rising sea levels caused by the freezing, the bulk of the Tang Dynasty ship, with its nearly 10-meter-high sides, had been frozen beneath the surface. Scrambling up the site and entering the interior, Loki discovered that the interior of this massive ship remained remarkably the same as when they arrived. In the captain's cabin, A half-frozen cup of tea sat by the rudder. A logbook, a telescope, a compass, and a hand-drawn map were all present, neatly arranged in the proper places. Only one person was missing. Not even a frozen corpse, let alone a living one, was to be found in the cabin. Walking down the frost-covered stairs, Loki descended to the lower level of the ship. He discovered that this ship was significantly larger than the modest ship given to him by the Illuminati's gatekeeper, to ensure Iolu's quest for the Leviathan. The Izumo Trading Company had furnished it with the highest standards. This ship had 2 levels below deck. The first floor housed the crew's lounge, along with a kitchen, bathroom, and weapons and armor storage. The lower floors were brimming with supplies for survival and exploration, including food, charcoal, fresh water, and gunpowder. A brief inspection revealed that only a minimal portion of the ship's supplies had been used. Extremely hungry and exhausted, he forgot to explore. The thick ice cap and the ship's sturdy outer walls enclosed the interior like a sealed cave. This was the first safe haven he had encountered on this flat ice sheet. The 4 frail men desperately needed supplies. Retrieving charcoal and kerosene from the bottom of the cabin, Loki and Olfgar lit the stove in the middle of the ship. Lawrence, the ship's doctor, was still trembling, but Emma Waldorf, who was more frail, had yet to fully regain consciousness. The stove ignited, sending gusts of hot air emanating from it. The remaining 4 men and 5 dogs huddled around the stove, practically pressing their bodies against it to absorb the warmth from the fire. They were utterly freezing. Ha ha ha. I'm a natural-born explorer. I found supplies in a new continent. That's the kind of story I want to brag to the gods after I die. The flames revitalized old Mangor. He laughed heartily, and Lawrence, the ship's doctor beside him, couldn't help but smile. If nothing unexpected happened, the moment he placed the Holy Cross on the new continent, the Holy Lord Christ would instantly ascend to the power of his path of holy light. After a brief warming, Loki ventured back into the warehouse. The ship's storehouse was well stocked with food. The low temperature ensured that the food remained frozen, not rotten. Loki brought out the dried potatoes and mushrooms, a common Chinese culinary staple during ocean voyages, from the kitchen and boiled them in water. While he waited, crystal-clear rice was added to a pot of ice water, simmering into thin porridge. A hungry person can't eat dry food, as it can easily burst their stomach. When the porridge was cooked, Loki lifted Emma's head, opened her mouth, and emptied it into her mouth. She was the only one of the 4 present who wasn't a chosen one. Although her physique was superior to that of an average human woman, the combination of days of travel, cold, and hunger had left her breathless. Lawrence, having regained some of his psychic powers, chanted gospel prayers and used holy light spells to awaken her physical abilities. After working for half the night, the girl finally recovered with a few dry coughs. A huge weight lifted from their hearts. They all devoured the large pot of porridge. While the others dozed off in the warm cabin, Loki went down to the lower deck to retrieve a few frozen hens. He chopped them up with his axe, cooked them, and shared them with the 5 hungry sled dogs. Temperatures within the Arctic Circle remain at -50 degrees Celsius year-round. 50 years had passed, and the animals, having died of natural causes, lay frozen like specimens, therefore retaining their moisture. Thawed and cooked, their meat was fresh and tender. Throwing them to the 5 sled dogs, they devoured them, even for the only ones who hadn't eaten anything were the living sacrifices Loki had brought along. Lawrence held food to his lips, but he kept his eyes shut, unmoved. Even if he pried open his mouth and forced hot porridge into his mouth, he wouldn't swallow. The stoves lit, steam rising from the cabin. Exhausted, everyone fell asleep, but Emma forced herself to find Papyrus, write a note about finding a new land, and send a raven back to the ship to let her brothers behind her know they were safe. After this final act, she could no longer hold on and fell into deep sleep. She slept for who knew how long, but when she awoke, Loki had already prepared the next meal. 20 years had passed since arriving in the other world, and this was the first time he had cooked a Chinese meal. Loki removed a large piece of air-dried pork ribs from the bottom of the cabin and cut them into sections with a kitchen knife. He paired it with dried beans and dried potato slices, seasoning it with spices from the cabin and frozen soy sauce. Aside from a lack of scallions, ginger, and garlic, everything else was perfect. A large pot of dried beans and pork ribs, accompanied by a bowl of rice, was served. When the 4 woke up, each of them devoured a large bowl, and finally felt life returning to their bodies. Loki's frozen mind finally regained its ability to think normally. He first retrieved the logbook from the captain's cabin. But when he opened it, he saw Fuelin, black-robed Dakin, and even white-robed Dakin. What kind of countries were these? The names the Tang people gave these Western continental countries didn't match the names later Western historians would assign to them, such as Arabia, Egypt, and Tunisia. His lack of a thorough understanding of Tang culture made this book seem like a mystery to Loki. The last page of the logbook recorded the arrival of the Lizzie in the land of extreme yin. According to the records of Kagan practitioners in the pre-Qin period, the land of extreme yin was a frozen ocean. However, this time they discovered a new continent. After 3 days of rest on the coast, Xiao Lu led an expedition team of 100 people into the Black Mountains of the island. Reading this, Loki had a huge question in his mind. According to the records in the logbook, Xiao Lu's fleet had a total of 11 ships. Among these 11 ships, the Lichi alone had 78 crew members. In other words, the total number of living people in the entire fleet should be no less than 800. He only brought 100 people to explore the continent, so where did the remaining 700 people who stayed on the coast go? Chapter 93 The Monster Appears. This was only Loki's first doubt. The second stemmed from the sacrifices. According to Emma's description and Loki's own experience, once these things were arranged in an array, a remote control was kept in hand to activate them. For example, the first big brother he'd captured on the reef. Only after he called out would the other sacrifices in the array, hearing his call, activate one by one. The one in his hand had been hung on a cross, starved of food and water for 50 years, yet remained functional without decay. Common sense dictated that frozen items stored in the ship's hold should be more fresh. Why, even though he'd activated the sacrifices all along the way, there hadn't been a single movement from the frozen fleet? Had the sacrifices revolted and killed the crew? Or had they fled elsewhere for safety? Loki felt he had to figure this out, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to sleep peacefully in the hold. The next morning, after a hearty meal of chicken stewed with dried mushrooms, Loki and his companions packed their bags and planned to explore the several ships on the coast. But this time, Emma, unusually, chose not to follow. Since regaining her strength, she had been filled with curiosity about everything within the ship. From the rivets connecting the ships, to the compass in the captain's cabin, to the daily necessities the crew had smuggled in, the explorer from Constantinople expressed intense interest. The proud Tang people of Conqueror's Fortress rarely allowed these hairy savages aboard their vessels. Given such a precious opportunity, she decided to stay aboard and carefully document the intricate components she saw, as well as the living sacrifice she had never had the chance to examine in detail. This suited Loki just fine. He had already searched the entire ship for the past few days. There was no danger aboard, but as a precaution, he still left 5 sled dogs to guard the gates to prevent the disturbing crews from flying in and out. Stepping out of the cabin, the sky was starless and moonless, an unusually dark night. After finding a sampan to block the door for Emma, Loki and the other 2 lit torches and walked along the frozen coastline. Loki was still pulling the sled they had brought with them, which contained a barrel of kerosene for the torches, some food, and a few bundles of wood. Their destination was the largest flagship in the fleet, just off the coast. The wind and snow had subsided tonight, and the sky was overcast. Holding their torches high, their visibility, reflecting off the ice, was around 30 meters. But as the 3 of them approached the massive flagship, Loki couldn't help but slow his pace. "Brother Gore, don't you think this ship seems a little strange?" "Yeah, very strange." Loki and Gore were both Vikings who made their livings on ships. Every winter, they saw all sorts of ships frozen to the sea. But they had never seen one frozen in this state. Unlike other ships, buried beneath the ice, this one wasn't tilted to port or starboard, but rather, its tail was raised high at a 45-degree angle, tilting and sticking out from the frozen surface like a raised guillotine. Holding the torch high, Loki could even see the vines and shellfish growing on the ship's underside. How could they do this? Could it be that a giant had been holding down the bow for 3 to 5 months, waiting for the sea to freeze over before releasing it? "Brother Gore, have you ever seen a ship trapped in the ice like this?" Gormarish slowly shook his head, his hammer tightening involuntarily. "Damn it. Could a giant octopus have grabbed the bow underwater and frozen in place just as it was about to pull it to the surface? Haha. Giant squids are monsters that lurk in the deep sea. How could they possibly be so close to shore?" Sensing a faint sense of danger, Loki signaled Gore and the others to stay away. He drew his blood-red stone axe, slowly alternating his steps. The frozen shore was now in a dead silence, the only sound being his heavy breathing. As he approached the eerie shipwreck, about 30 meters away, Loki heard the ice crackle beneath his feet. Looking down, he saw, by the light of his burning torch, a gigantic eye seemingly opening from the thick ice beneath his feet. Impossible. This must be my hallucination. How could a creature hide in the ice, with an eyeball more than a man's height? He held his breath, mustered all his courage, and brought the torch closer to the ice. The light ignited a calf-sized black pupil beneath the ice, which suddenly contracted. The next second, with a series of violent crackling sounds, the nearly 10-meter thick ice beneath Loki's feet shattered. Icy seawater surged from the cracks, and from beneath the ice, a gigantic, fiery red monster crawled out. This is a hermit crab. This monster resembled a typical hermit crab, except it stood nearly 30 meters tall. The shell that once served as the crab's home had been replaced by Xiaolu's flagship. The Tang warship rising high above the sea was the tail shell of this enormous beast. This gigantic hermit crab had actually used the Tang flagship as its shell, establishing itself amidst the wreckage. A massive monster the size of a small stadium suddenly rose from the ice beneath their feet. Everyone's first reaction was to turn and flee. Loki, a mortal, was not surprised. But he was too close to this towering hermit crab. Its massive claws shattered the frozen sea surface and immediately clawed at Loki's waist. It was a massive claw, nearly 50 meters long. Almost as long as the half-segmented flagship. Seeing no escape, Loki raised his blood-red stone axe and struck the hermit crab's crimson claw. However, facing this massive prehistoric beast, Loki had overestimated his own strength. The axe struck out, and the immense recoil immediately drew blood from its jaws. Every part of the hermit crab exposed outside the ship was exceptionally tough, especially its claws, which served as weapons, densely covered with sharp spines and coarse bristles. As the claws were about to close, Loki flipped over and leaped directly into the icy water. But the hermit crab, which had long hibernated here, clearly wasn't about to let him go. Besides its claws, the two tentacles on its head were even more versatile weapons. A whip-like tentacle lashed out, grasping Loki's waist, yanking him from the water and hurling him high into the air. Just as he was about to fall into the monster crab's maw, a sudden thunderclap echoed from the rolling dark clouds. Gulmarish, wielding an inky black hammer, had somehow crept between the hermit crab's eyes. Chapter 94, Remarks on the Release. Thank you all for supporting authentic reading. I'm not one to follow trends, so this book's performance is far from outstanding. After all, most emerging things fade into the dust of history, rarely remembered. Therefore, I'm deeply grateful to my fellow readers who have supported me with recommendations, rewards, and monthly tickets. You're my strong support as I continue on my journey. I still remember the shock I felt when I read The Mummy 20 years ago. A piece of ancient history imbued with magic and fantasy elements might be considered absurd, bizarre, and lacking in detailed verification, but I believe this is the aesthetic I pursue. Thank you to everyone who has followed me to this point. Imagination is our shared wealth. Chapter 95, Battle with Hermit Crabs. Of the 8 levels in Valhalla, the most mysterious is undoubtedly the Thor's Path. This path was created by Thor, the son of Odin. Legend has it that Thor is a free spirit who enjoys wandering the world, particularly as a mortal. Therefore, to attain the Thor's Path, simply entering Valhalla and drinking a potion is useless. Only by engaging in a life-or-death battle against hordes of enemies can one gain Thor's attention. Oldgar has accomplished this. After surviving the arduous defense of Frostwater Village, he successfully caught Thor's eye and became a chosen one of the Thor's Path. This was his first battle as a chosen one. Facing the monster, he showed no fear, instead, raising his hammer and roaring with laughter. A thunderbolt crashed from the dark clouds, striking Oldgar's hammer with pinpoint accuracy, creating a massive arc of lightning. The hermit crab possessed 2 vertical eyes, perched high above its heavy armor. This beast, accustomed to the polar night, was momentarily blinded by the sudden lightning and frantically struggled, waving its massive claws. This gave Loki a brief opening to swim out of the frigid waters. Using his hands and feet, he struggled to the shore, a layer of snow-white ice immediately forming on his skin. This was the Arctic Circle, where temperatures dipped to -50 degrees Celsius. He had to move immediately, or his soaking wet clothes would drain all his body heat in minutes. Rushing to the sled, the ship's doctor, Lawrence was about to cast a holy light spell when the mountain-like ship in midair descended upon them like a sledge. "Get out of the way! Get out of the way!" Loki shouted. In desperation, Lawrence paused his spell and used the holy light spell to illuminate the darkness. The two men hurriedly sought shelter between the ship's planks. With a loud crack, shattered planks, mixed with ice and icicles, struck down on their heads. At that moment, a wooden barrel fell through the cracks of the broken ship, crashing down beside Loki. Turning, he saw it was a barrel of gunpowder. In the 8th century AD, while guns and cannonballs hadn't yet been invented, gunpowder was already being used in a variety of ways. Whether it was for blasting mines or making fireworks, the Tang people traditionally carried gunpowder on their ships for emergencies. The Lizzie where the group had rested yesterday, and even the merchant ship the guard had given Loki, all had gunpowder. This flagship clearly had even more. Izumo Trading Company ships typically stored gunpowder, fuel oil, and other supplies in a dry compartment at the stern to prevent moisture, if the gunpowder was still usable. According to Loki's memory of hermit crabs, their most vulnerable part was their soft bodies, which had to be constantly concealed within conch shells. As hermit crabs grew, they had to constantly change conch shells in search of a more suitable habitat. Quickly sprinting to this lead, Loki lifted the barrel of fuel they had brought with him and, timing it precisely as the ship was about to fall again, doused it with a precise stream of fuel at the ship's stern. Brother Gore, thunder, the blinding period had passed, and the giant hermit crab was about to regain its sight. Old Gore, cradling the crab's 3-meter-tall pupil, was swaying in the wind and rain. But even in this precarious situation, he still accurately understood Loki's intention. The Tang dynasty ships were constructed entirely of wood. While wood was flammable, in temperatures of -50 degrees Celsius, fire or lightning alone would be incapable of igniting wood. However, dousing them with fuel would have a completely different effect. Once the fuel, which continuously burned upon contact with fire, heated the wood to a certain temperature, the entire wooden ship would instantly burst into flames. What followed perfectly confirmed Loki and Gore's suspicions. The thunder struck, and a raging fire began. The hermit crab had barely noticed the flames behind it, and before it could break through the ice and dive into the water, the blaze had already ignited the gunpowder stored at the ship's stern. With a violent explosion, flaming wood fragments, mixed with the pale blue flesh of the hermit crab, erupted, sending a trail of blue smoke through the pitch-black night sky. Shattered intestines and digestive organs flew everywhere, raining down upon Loki. Along with the charred flesh, several emaciated figures slid out of the shards and landed beside him. This was a living sacrifice. Loki immediately understood where the living sacrifices from Xiaolu's fleet had gone. Emma had mentioned that living sacrifices were a favorite food of the gods. This ancient hermit crab, searching for food in the Arctic Circle, must have somehow accidentally consumed several of the sacrifices. From then on, the beast grew ever larger and stronger. Unable to find a conch suitable for its size, it used the massive Tang ship to conceal the fragile rear end of its body. To achieve this goal, the beast must have killed every remaining member of the fleet on the coast. Suffering a sudden and severe blow to its tail, the hermit crab let out a high-pitched howl of pain. A beast that was wounded but not dead was the most dangerous. The best course of action at this moment was undoubtedly to flee and wait for it to bleed to death. But Loki couldn't flee, for old Gore still clung to the hermit crab's vertical eye. And the beast had recovered from the lightning's blinding effects. The flaming hull scattered everywhere, temporarily dispelling the chill. Loki raised his axe behind him and, with a roar, charged at the hermit crab. The explosion completely shattered the hermit crab's body, hidden within the ship's interior. The hermit crab's pale blue blood showered him, making him feel as if he were enveloped in a bloody mist. Meanwhile, the blood axe in his hand, after absorbing the hermit crab's blue blood, also absorbed this blood, imbued with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, into its blade. The familiar rhythm of his heartbeat returned, and, leaping sideways on the drifting ice, Loki quickly approached the hermit crab. The hermit crab had evidently noticed the insect charging towards it, raising its massive claws and striking Loki. "Brother Gore, take this opportunity to run." With these final words, Loki, axe raised high, continued charging the hermit crab. He ignored the claws that fell from midair. They were the hermit crab's hardest part, he couldn't break them. His target was the crab's head, just below its eyes. The claws fell, but this time, Loki's axe hooked onto the spikes. Climbing onto the claws, he ran at full speed. The blue blood dripping from his body fueled him with psionic energy, allowing him to transform into a formless shadow, as if shrouded in a bloody mist. Loki approached the massive head at breakneck speed. The soft reef spun towards him, but in his shadowy state. Loki was as thin as air, impossible to hit. The 50-meter distance vanished in a flash, and behind the claws, the crab's eyes and head were already behind him. Loki leaped from the end of the crab's claws. In midair, he arched his body into an arc, a memory passed down from the battles of the Viking ancestors against ancient giants thousands of years ago. While holding the axe high, bending his body like a bowstring maximizes the strength of his core, waist and abdomen. The stone axe, soaked in the hermit crab's blood, was nearly indestructible. The blood-red stone axe cleanly shattered the hermit crab's shell between its eyes. Loki, axe and all, plunged headfirst into the wound, spurting pale blue blood. Crabs rely on their hard shell for defense. Once shattered, the shell reveals tender flesh within. Loki stepped on the unknown flesh and blood, swinging his axe left and right. The blood-red stone axe grew sharper as it absorbed more blood and flesh. Simultaneously, pale blue hermit crab blood slowly rose around Loki. Swinging the stone axe, more and more blue blood imbued with psychic energy was drawn into Loki's body through the axe. His entire body continuously emanated an inexhaustible and violent force. As the blood axe flew, the hermit crab's struggle slowed down. After Loki had practically reduced its entire brain to pulp, the enormous crab finally came to a stop. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 96, second entry. Opening his eyes again, Loki was back in his own sea of consciousness. It was the same swirling blood mist illusion, the same island on the vast blood lake. But this time was different from the last time. Besides the 60 or so expressionless Viking warriors standing on the island within the blood lake, a towering hermit crab had also appeared within the blood mist. It now stood quietly amidst the Viking warriors, motionless, like a statue. Where was Guchanking? Loki had always harbored a fear of this powerful key cultivator who had inexplicably appeared within his sea of consciousness. He stood up and scanned his surroundings for a long moment, then narrowed his eyes and spotted his figure far above the misty island. He was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, floating in the air. Wisps of blood-color mist were entering his body with his breaths. In just a month, a wisp of this person's soul had regained its ability to cultivate. This person was hiding within my sea of consciousness, absorbing my spiritual energy to regain his strength. It felt like having a giant rat stealing food in my house, and unfortunately, this rat was invincible to me for the time being. How could I possibly deal with it? For a moment, Loki couldn't come up with a solution. He was so unfamiliar with this body of the Crimson Creator that, if not for 2 previous encounters, he wouldn't have known how to actively enter his own sea of consciousness. Sitting cross-legged in the soft red soil, he began to ponder his current situation. The information currently known was that all enemies killed by the bloody axe would appear in this bloody mist illusion. Guchanking called it my sea of consciousness, so let's just call it that for now. After their death, not only would their bodies enter my sea of consciousness, but also their clothing and weapons. For example, the giant hermit crab still had half of its Tang Dynasty ship tucked away on its soft tail. This wasn't the wreckage of the ship after the explosion, but its intact state before the battle with me. Stepping closer to observe, Loki saw the hermit crab's abdomen act like a flexible tentacle, firmly grasping the ship's floor and steel frame. This was how the creature dragged the conch along with it. Neither the Viking warrior nor the hermit crab noticed Loki approaching. This feeling was familiar. Loki frowned and stepped aside. Was this a common trope in some old single-player game? When your hero reaches a certain level, you're presented with an option to view all the minions and bosses you've killed. While looking at a computer screen might offer a sense of accomplishment, this journey wasn't a game. The 3 gods standing above the sea of blood surely hadn't designed this feature for their own amusement, allowing them to observe the fallen souls slain by their axes. Loki recalled his experiences in the sleeping city, consuming the ancient god's inner elixir, and entering the blood mist realm. When the slender-horned giant placed him on the inkstone, he was still conscious. Even after the flame giant drained all the poisonous blue blood from his body, his eyes could still see. His brain was still capable of thinking. The most devastating blow came from the final blow, delivered by the shadowy giant, shrouded in smoke. It aimed directly at his head, and upon impact, he instantly lost consciousness. This meant that this sea of consciousness must be within his mind. But then the question arose, what was the purpose of this illusory space? Walking, Loki reached the back of the island. He spotted a wrench standing upright on the ground. This wrench resembled the one used when a train changes track on a railway. It stood upright, about a meter long, and its design was remarkably simple. It was now bent to the right, with a left-pointing arrow drawn on its tip. Was this asking him to move to the left? Loki gripped the wrench tightly, his palm trembling slightly. The last time he entered the blood mist illusion, Gu Chanking had still been awake. He was talking to me the whole time, and I was so busy thinking about how to deal with Gu Chanking that I didn't have time to look around. And this wrench I saw this time, what exactly is this thing used for? Unable to suppress his curiosity, he pushed the wrench hard to the left. With a click, the wrench triggered a mechanism somewhere, making a slight sound. Loki looked around and reached out to grab the wrench again, but found that he had turned into the nothingness state that only appears when charging in the blood mist. His right hand was like a ball of air, and he could no longer hold anything. What is this? While Loki was thinking, the Viking warriors and hermit crabs standing quietly like statues on the island moved at the same time. The Viking warriors raised their axes and roared. Loki, who was in the form of air, rushed straight towards the hermit crab that was as tall as a tower. The hermit crab also woke up at the same time, waving its huge crab claws and smashing it at the running Viking warrior. 60 Viking warriors, wielding axes, confronted a hermit crab that had lived in the Arctic Circle for centuries. A fierce battle erupted within Loki's mind. The hermit crab was massive and heavily armored, but its only weapon was a single, broadclaw. Shouting Odin's name, the Vikings charged fearlessly forward. They nimbly dodged the crab's attacks, grasping the bristles on its claws and climbing up its claws with their hands and feet. Another group of 20 or so men targeted the crab's tail. The Vikings who fell under Loki's axe were mountain dwellers from Fogduck Town who had invaded Coldwater Village. With their long arms and legs, the mountain dwellers, bred from their long, mountainous habitats, were exceptional climbers. Clutching their short axes in their jaws, they scaled the hull of a ship like a group of nimble apes. Despite its enormous size, the hermit crab, focused on the front, failed to see behind. Despite the desperate tremors, several Viking warriors clung to the side of the sinking ship and rushed into the cabin. Even in the face of death, these Viking warriors displayed unwavering bravery. Shortly after entering the cabin, blue blood began to flow from the hermit crab's tail. This blood dripped into the crimson soil, then slowly evaporated and rose, merging into the thick blood mist surrounding it. Loki stared wide-eyed at the blue smoke rising into the sky, and at that moment, he saw 3 massive heads rising above the blood mist. Chapter 97 Petri Dish. Since Loki moved the wrench, 3 things have happened within this blood mist space. 1. He entered a state of nothingness. 2. 60 Viking warriors and a hermit crab began fighting. 3. The sky above the blood mist illusion suddenly cleared. Loki looked up and saw a transparent membrane, similar to the film of the sunken city. Above it, 3 massive heads stared intently at the 2 combatants. They were none other than his old acquaintances, the Crown Giant, the Flame Giant, and the Shadow Giant. Surprise was an understatement. He stared wide-eyed at the 3 gods gazing at him from the sky, finally understanding the true meaning of this blood mist illusion he was in. This wasn't the sea of consciousness of the pre-Kinki cultivators Gu Chanking had described. These 3 had transformed their brains into a petri dish for studying Earth's life. Loki's mind raced. The bloody creator must have gifted him with a certain degree of recording when forging this body. But this function records the souls of living things. Indeed, these aren't flesh and blood creatures themselves, but rather spirits like Gu Chanking. This explains why the souls of those killed by the axe carry swords, clothing, and even a half-broken ship into a sea of consciousness. Because they are simply the last memories of themselves before their death. The blood-red stone axe acts like a burning pointer that burns data onto a hard drive. Every creature killed by the blood-red stone axe, whether human or a primitive creature like a hermit crab, has a portion of its soul extracted by the stone axe and entered a sea of consciousness. This portion of the soul is like the crickets in a cricket cage. If you move the wrench, they will kill each other. But the question arises, are these gleaming giants above going to all this trouble just to enjoy a cricket fight? What exactly do these powerful and mysterious outer gods seek? Loki doesn't yet know the answer on the isolated island. The battle between 60 Viking warriors and a giant hermit crab was nearly over. Loki had never imagined that the Viking warriors, slaughtered in the blood mist of Hanshu village, could be so powerful. Only about 20 of the 60 warriors remained, but the hermit crab, brandishing its massive claws, was already near death. Its struggles dwindled as more Viking warriors, using their climbing prowess, clambered atop the ship and burrowed into the hull, slicing through the crab's nearly unprotected, soft tail. Pale blue blood flowed everywhere. In the final moments of desperation, the hermit crab finally abandoned the massive ship. Its tenacious will to survive forced it to tuck its battered tail beneath its body, concealing its weakness and continuing the fight. But the blood-soaked Viking warriors surprisingly had a way to counter the attack. Tucked beneath its tail meant it couldn't use its claws to quickly turn. The Viking warriors circled behind the hermit crab and, with their nimble hatchets, began hacking at the armor on its back. The Viking warriors of Foggy Duck, who made their living by logging, were experts at standing still and chopping. They exploited the crab's rapid blood loss and slow turning speed, hacking away at it repeatedly. Within 10 minutes, they had ripped a large chunk of its white, rosy red shell from its body. Facing the Viking warriors, who swarmed around like flies, the hermit crab was at its wits' end. Aside from a few lucky strikes with its sharp, slender legs, which occasionally stabbed a Viking or two, the beast had no other defenses. The fight lasted half an hour, until the hermit crab finally collapsed from exhaustion. As it tumbled heavily into the red earth, Loki realized that only 6 of the 60 Vikings were still standing. The battle was over, and despite being covered in shredded flesh and crimson blood, they formed a neat line and stood again. At that moment, Loki's body returned from the void of air to its normal state. The wrench beneath his feet bounced back to its starting point with a thud, also transforming into a puff of air and disappearing into the red soil beneath his feet. The battle concluded, and the control switch naturally vanished. This design, imbued with a retro, mechanical aesthetic, made Loki, a time traveler, feel incredibly comfortable. However, after just a few seconds, the comfort abruptly ended. Above the blood mist space, the crowned giant reached out a massive hand, grasped the transparent glass cover at the top, and gently peeled it open. With 2 fingers as slender as those of high-speed train carriages, he gently picked up a few remaining Viking warriors and carefully held them in his palms. The dome vanished, and the already thin blood mist evaporated significantly. Loki could actually pierce the red mist and briefly see the outside world. He saw a profound darkness. The place where he stood was truly a petri dish, similar to the base of a fish tank. Within the dish, he stood in the dark red soil, while Guchanking's spirit body floated cross-legged high in the sky. Throughout the entire battle between the Vikings and the hermit crabs, he remained motionless, continuing to exhale blood-red mist. When the red mist dissipated, Loki saw his cheeks and realized that his once hot yellow skin was now stained with a faint blood-red hue. Loki had previously considered 2 possibilities for Guchanking's presence. 1. The Blood Creator wished to nourish his spirit so that he could possess him in the future. 2. He had placed him here as a kind of sword of Damocles hanging over his head, providing a check and balance between Guchanking and himself. But now, after witnessing the Vikings' battle against the hermit crabs, Loki had a new idea. He remembered the alien movie he had seen in his previous life. In the movie, after obtaining the alien eggs, the first group of scientists underestimated the aliens and were annihilated. If the Crimson Creator and his group of outer gods were imagined as scientists who had arrived on Earth, they severely underestimated the pre-Kigen practitioners living on Earth. As a result, the first pioneers to arrive on Earth were killed and smelted into elixirs. Among the pre-Kigen practitioners, the master alchemist Shen Gong was unaware of the true purpose of his formula. He naively believed that Qin Shi Huang had concocted an elixir that would grant longevity, but he didn't realize that it was actually a portal to the outer realm. After swallowing the elixir, Shen Gong exploded and died. The portal opened, allowing a swarm of fallen titans to enter the sunken city, perishing alongside the pre-Kigen practitioners. This was the Scarlet Creator's version of Alien 1. Now, let's look back at Alien 4. Human scientists' interest in this extraterrestrial creature hasn't waned with the death of their own kind. They've devised a new method for studying the xenomorphs, imprisoning the alien queen. Ripley, in a glass cage? This is just like me right now. I swallowed the inner elixir hidden by Xuan Hezi and opened the portal again. The 3 giants standing on the Red Sea transformed me into the chosen one of the Red Guts path. Perhaps over the past few hundred years, the technology of the bloody creator's lineage has also developed. This outer god named King Laphasar transformed me into a new type of test subject that can absorb the souls of earth creatures into a petri dish. They can observe earth creatures through me without having to come to earth in person. So a new question arises. What is the responsibility of Gu Changqing, the pre-kin swordsman who keeps breathing in and out in this petri dish? I'll go to work first. There are 2 more chapters to come later. P.S. It's a new January, please give me a monthly ticket. Chapter 98 Awakening. In the Alien movie, the glass case holding the alien queen is equipped with neurotoxins, lasers, explosives, and other high-tech weapons. Their purpose is that if they detect something amiss, scientists can activate these weapons and eliminate the alien within the confines of the glass case. Now, looking back at myself, I'm like Ripley, a blend of alien and human genes, a fusion of the inner core forged by the bloody creator and my own human body. At this point, I'm still relatively weak compared to them, and I might not pose much of a threat to these 3 bloody giants. But since they're not of my kind, I have to be on guard. With this thought, Loki looked up at Gu Changqing, hovering high in the sky. Could this guy be the tolerance for these 3 giants? From a human perspective, that's likely the case. At this moment, Gu Changqing was just a wisp of soul. He constantly exhaled blood-colored mist, his entire body stained with a crimson hue. This guy could very well be the laser sword the bloody creator has planted in his petri dish. This was the ruthless man who, along with Zhuan Hezi, had slaughtered nearly 1,000 fallen titans in the sunken city. If anything uncontrollable happened to him or the other creatures in the petri dish, causing them to inhale excessive amounts of blood mist, the puppet-like Gu Changqing would immediately strike, crushing any unexpected event. Relying on his time-traveling mind, Loki quickly sorted out the situation in his own way. He felt the conclusions he reached through this process seemed more scientific, more in line with the spirit of scientific research. So, this Gu Changqing might not necessarily be his enemy. One day, I might even need to rely on him to escape this monitored, transformed fish tank. After a long wait, the blood mist surrounding Loki completely evaporated. Just as he was about to take a closer look at the pitch-black surroundings, the 3 giants had returned to his side. This was Loki's first time observing these 3 towering giants from outside the blood mist. They wore golden armor, their crimson skin inscribed with line after line of massive cuneiform script. The bloody creator, King Raphasal. Another, the creator of fire, Emperor Flintfire. Before Loki could identify the last one, a massive hand reached out to him. The 3 giants placed the 6 captured Viking warriors in a petri dish like toy soldiers. Loki then realized they were completely different from when they'd been taken. They had grown taller, their skin as dark as the fallen titans. The weapons they wielded had also transformed from the wooden-handled short axes of mountain warriors into massive broad axes as shimmering as black mirrors. The material of those weapons was the exact same as those used by the fallen titans in the sunken city. Was this an upgrade after defeating the enemy? Just as Loki was about to approach the Viking warriors for a closer look, a massive hand descended from the sky and gently grasped them. Turning back, he saw the hand that had grasped him was the pitch-black shadow giant. Being held like a bug wasn't pleasant. Loki twisted his hips, trying to break free, but the shadow giant chuckled softly and blew gently at him. Thick, inky black smoke billowed in, and Loki felt himself enveloped by a gloomy chill. Then, instantly, he lost consciousness. An indescribable amount of time passed before Loki opened his eyes again. Struggling to his feet, he found himself back in the cabin of the Lychee. Snoring filled the air, and Emma, illuminated by the flames of a few hurricane lanterns, hunched over a simple wooden table, meticulously drawing a plan. Hearing a noise behind her, she glanced back. Seeing Loki struggling to rise, her eyes widened, and she let out an uncontrollable cheer. She then shook Oldgor, who was soundly asleep beside her. Oldgor sat up, sleepily. Loki looked at his face and was surprised to find that he had not only fully regained the weight lost from starvation, but had actually grown 2 sizes heavier than before. Hearing the noise, the ship's doctor, Lawrence, also rose from his bunk. He had gained quite a bit of weight. How long have I been unconscious? Loki had a bad feeling. He couldn't control when to enter the blood mist illusion. The last time he entered, he was unconscious for a full month. This time. Haha. My village chief, you're finally awake. You've been unconscious for a full 21 days. Brother Lawrence tried everything he could think of to wake you, but you slept so deeply that no one could awaken you. Slapping his cheek, Loki rolled over and sat up on the soft bed. After 21 days of inactivity, his entire body felt like rust, crackling with the slightest movement. Rolling up his sleeves, he saw the inscription on his arm. The original Sequence 9, knife-wielding ghoul was gone, replaced by Sequence 8, Crimson Apostle. Beneath the inscription Creator, King Raphael was another line of text, V9, V8 Upgrader, Emperor Suhul. It seems my body, unlike the other chosen ones, possesses the ability to naturally upgrade. Each time a sequence level is raised, one must return to the blood mist dimension to be forged by the three giants using their hammers. Based on Loki's experience in actual combat, the Sequence 9 knife-wielding ghoul possesses three special abilities. 1. When a cut is made and blood sheds, its own blood evaporates into blood mist. Once this blood mist comes into contact with the blood of another human, it infects and fuses in a unique way, creating more blood mist. 2. When running at high speed within the blood mist, one enters a state of nothingness as air-like. While not as powerful as Old Ward's ability to flash through the blood mist, this ability still offers significant advantages during a charge. 3. The blood mist charges the bloodstone axe. The bloodstone axe requires abundant psychic energy to function effectively. While the stone axe is extremely powerful within the blood mist, if it is stained by the crab's more refined psychic blood, as in a battle with a hermit crab, the stone axe can cut through almost anything. Even the half-meter thick, hard shell of a hermit crab's head could be shattered like glass. Having upgraded his sequence level, this new body should possess some new abilities. Loki retracted his left arm, but in the process, he noticed something slightly different about his left hand. A complex pattern, resembling a magic circle, had appeared on his palm. The strokes forming the pattern bore a striking resemblance to the cuneiform inscription on his left arm, revealing a trace of a common cultural heritage. But how exactly should it be used? He wasn't sure yet. He stood up to loosen up his neck muscles. Several sled dogs, having awakened, came over, wagging their tails frantically. You didn't blame me for eating your companions. Haha, I'm so sorry for that. Loki grabbed a dog's paw and gently shook it. However, his eyes drifted to the corner of the house, and he nearly fell off his bed. 1, 2, 3. If I remember correctly, when we set out from the ship's landing, there were only 4 of us, me, Gore, the ship's doctor, and Emma. So the question is, who is that black figure sleeping soundly by the door? Chapter 99 Upgraded Living Sacrifice. For about half an hour, Old Gore explained to Loki everything that had happened in the real world since he'd killed the hermit crab and fallen unconscious. When the crab died, its body floated to the shore, where the ice had broken. Old Gore struggled to climb out of the icy waters and onto the crab's remains. He plunged through the large hole in its skull into the still warm brain matter and carried Loki out. He and Lawrence carried him to the burning wreckage of the ship to warm themselves by a fire. That's when they discovered living sacrifices scattered across the ground. These were the remains of the hermit crabs, blown out from their intestines when the lightning ignited the ship's hull, detonating the explosives. They were far more alive than the ones Loki had found on the reef. Some could even reach out their hands and crawl across the ground. These bizarre creatures had been digesting inside the crabs for a full 50 years, yet they hadn't yet completely dissolved. After their clothes dried, the 2 men returned the unconscious Loki and the 7 sacrifices found on the ice to the Lychee's cabin. That night, after everyone had fallen asleep, Old Man Gore, drowsy, thought he heard a faint chewing sound. The insensitive blacksmith instinctively assumed it was just a rat that had escaped, and since he was already well fed and exhausted, he didn't take it seriously. The next morning, only 4 of the 8 sacrificial offerings were left in the adjacent cabin. The other 4 had been reduced to skulls, and aside from their skulls, all other parts of their bodies had vanished. Emma was, after all, a registered explorer of the Royal Academy of Sciences of Constantinople. After carefully observing the scene, she said in a deep voice, I once read in some rather secret files that when a group of living sacrifices are in a weak period at the same time, they will sacrifice themselves to help others and let their own kind eat them in order to obtain the divine power in their own blood. These living sacrifices who came to the world with the blessing of Quetzalcoatl. They firmly believe that the meaning of their existence is to be eaten by powerful messengers of God, so that they can obtain the divine power hidden in their flesh and blood. It is for this reason that navigators who go to the New World and can return safely are very rare. Even if a few can cross the Atlantic Ocean full of storms, whirlpools, and primitive creatures, they are very likely to be killed by savage hunters lurking in the rainforest when they step onto land. They call themselves Amazon warriors and have the ability to strip divinity from other chosen ones, and the way they do it is to turn the other party into their own meal. Old Goar couldn't help feeling a chill in his heart when he heard this. Although life in Scandinavia was poor, they firmly believed that human flesh was unclean. Even starving Vikings would not resort to cannibalism. Yet, the Maya civilization Emma was talking about was actually a people who practiced cannibalism to ascend the social ladder. The methods of advancement differed greatly between different faiths. Well, if that's how these guys live, then let them eat. With Loki unconscious, the oldest, Old Goar, temporarily took over as leader. We only have 5 sled dogs left. They'd struggle to pull a few of us back to shore, let alone 8 living sacrifices. It would be best if they could eat each other, leaving only one behind. It wouldn't take up space. The ship's doctor, Lawrence Nightingale, disagreed with this approach, but after having endured the harsh winter on the way there, he held back. Another night passed, and the sounds of chewing returned from next door. The 3 men tried their best to block out the horrific scene. By the next morning, only 2 of the 4 sacrifices remained. Old Goar was surprised to find, upon opening the door, that the sacrifice Loki had found on the reef had actually made it to the final round. His once dry eyes could now twitch slightly, and a hint of color had returned to his sunken cheeks. Supplemented with nutrients from cannibalism, new flesh had grown on his face, filling the dry skin. It was even possible to reconstruct their former appearance. He was a very young man, in some ways. Calling him a child wouldn't be an exaggeration. Old Goar estimated his age to be between 12 and 15. The sacrifice could already tremble and walk, but he couldn't yet vocalize. Aside from a high-pitched howl, his throat could only utter a few weak, jumbled monosyllables. He kept uttering the word zoo, which Emma would use as a temporary name for him. Old Goar's intuition told him that changes would occur tonight. Lawrence, Emma, and Old Goar, along with the sacrifice Yaju, had wandered for days on the frozen sea, ravaged by the cold winds. Loki's discovery of this continent was thanks to his howling on board, which activated the other sacrifices. That night, each of them prayed in their own way for Yaju, hoping he would win the final round. These 2 sacrifices had practically taken human form. The victor would undoubtedly be infinitely more human. And so, are Yaju won? Loki asked, approaching XX, who lay soundly asleep in the doorway. Ever since he devoured the last sacrificial offering, he's become like a normal person, able to eat and sleep normally. Emma approached him and whispered in Loki's ear. He's a good boy, very clever. In just over 10 days, he's learned quite a few Viking words and can communicate with us. He can speak, Loki asked, his eyes wide. Emma nodded vigorously, her eyes curved into crescents of joy. Gently pulling the quilt over the sleeping half-grown child, Loki did not intend to harass him for the time being. Is this guy not aggressive? No, Old Goar answered gruffly, not worried about waking him up at all. He's as docile as a cat, curious about everything, a good kid. Oh my god, I didn't find any relics of the pre-Kigen practitioners after this trip, but the child made another one. Loki smiled bitterly and sat back on the bed, reaching out to scoop out a spoonful of cold leftover porridge from the pot beside him. Updating 10,000 words a day really takes half my life. I really don't know how those ruthless people on the list do it. After the release, I will update 3 times if I can, and if I really can't, I will guarantee 2 at least. By the way, I want a monthly ticket. Chapter 100 Old Goar's Harvest. We were also busy during the time you were unconscious. After Loki finished a bowl of porridge and satisfied his stomach, Goar stretched out a big furry hand and forcefully moved his own bed. Only then did Loki realize that his bed was actually a large wooden box with luxurious decorations. Old Goar fully demonstrated the Viking pirate spirit of thieves never leave empty-handed and brought a box from an unknown ship. When he opened the box, the first thing that caught Loki's eye was a pile of golden coins. Picking up one, Loki found that the gold coin was exquisitely carved. The front was engraved with a profile of a middle-aged man, and the back was inscribed with the words Wessex gold pound. This is a gold coin forged by the Kingdom of Wessex, the most powerful of the 7 kingdoms of the English Isles. People in other countries, such as Northumbria and Mercia, may not be able to earn even 1 coin in a year's work, but Wessex is different. This country is extremely powerful, driven by the reasonable economic policies of King Egbert. The Kingdom of Wessex has many wealthy businessmen traveling across the Mediterranean and farmers with large numbers of slaves. Silver coins can no longer settle their wealth, so this country forges gold coins to maintain the circulation of wealth. Emma explained the origin of the gold pound to Loki in detail. Old man Gore on the side laughed and added, "There are more than 60 of them. During the time you were unconscious, I went around the 9 ships frozen around the coastline. A total of 60 gold pounds were found, and more than 350-gram Wessex silver pounds. As for the copper pennies, haha, I don't even want to take them because they are too heavy." Loki noticed the 9 ships that old Gore mentioned. He clearly remembered that Xiaolu's notebook recorded that there were 11 ships departing from England. It seemed that 2 ships should have withdrawn from this coast. It was the people on these 2 ships who took away Xiaolu's notebook. It's just that it is still unknown whether Xiaolu is among them. "My brother, have you considered how we are going to carry such heavy things back to our 2 ships, up?" So, Gore was speechless for a moment. Seeing gold and silver, I'm afraid all Vikings' first reaction is to move it back first. But Loki's attention was attracted by other things again. This was something that looked quite two-dimensional. It was a staff. After picking up the staff, he saw 2 silver broadswords with quite gorgeous decorations at the bottom of the box. Even though it had been placed in an uninhabited shipwreck for 50 years, the silver sword and the staff still emitted a faint holy light. This is a weapon blessed by the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the highest-ranking ecclesiastical leader assigned by the Pope to the British Isles, explained the ship's doctor, Lawrence, who came over to explain. Her holy mark is the symbol of an iris. Lawrence extended a slender finger to the gemstone atop the staff, which was emitting a faint white light. From the outside, the stone looked like a piece of transparent glass, but within it seemed a pure white rune was constantly glowing. The rune was the shape of an iris. "Is this Archbishop of Canterbury a woman?" Loki asked hesitantly. "Yes, her name is Lady Evans. She is said to be from the Silent Sisterhood, an ancient organization within the Pope. The Silent Sisterhood guards the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the Archbishop's 12 sacred relics. They rarely appear in public, and their origins are extremely mysterious. This is a fact known to every member of the Holy Lord's faith living in the English Isles, so it's no secret. Elder Letty's divine power has reached sequence 2, Law Scorer, of the Path of Law. This rank is infinitely close to that of a deity. It is said that at this level, the chosen ones of the Path of Law possess the power of permanent enchantment. Their blessings can form laws upon weapons and equipment, lasting forever. These items should all be weapons blessed by the bishop. This staff can amplify the holy light psychic energy of the chosen ones of the holy bishop to a certain extent. As for these 2 silver swords are extremely lethal to unclean creatures such as the fallen and the undead, and weapons blessed by the bishop can also cause additional damage to sinful humans. Were these things found in those shipwrecks? Loki asked. Yes. There was a ship with a plain white interior, with torn white cloth hanging everywhere. There wasn't a penny in that wreck. I searched through all the boxes and cabinets and almost smashed a boat to find these 3 things that look valuable: 2 silver swords, 1 for old Gore and 1 for Emma. The remaining rather ornate staff, he handed it to Lawrence Nightingale without a second thought. "Me, I get 1 too?" Emma asked in surprise. "Haha. We Vikings have always satisfied ourselves first when we rob, and then consider others. Xiaolu's shipwreck was found by each of us risking our lives. It is reasonable that everyone should be rewarded, but what buts? I know you are from a wealthy family and you don't care about this little bit of silver. But as the leader, I have to treat everyone equally, right? If you don't want it, you can give it to some good-looking guy when we return to the ship. This is none of my business." After getting a share of the spoils, Lawrence was obviously the most excited. An amplification staff blessed by the Archbishop of Canterbury. In England, this item could fetch at least 200 gold pounds. It was practically equivalent to a seaside manor with 1,000 acres of fertile farmland. He softly recited the Holy Light Gospel, and a faint ray of holy light infused the gem. After the amplification, it was as if a pure white sun rose within the cabin. The healing holy light shone warmly upon everyone. It lingered for a long time before fading. Through a battle with the hermit crabs, Lawrence realized his own shortcomings. Even though he had reached sequence 8 evangelist when Loki and Gore fought the hermit crabs, the weak holy light within him meant his spellcasting range was completely insufficient to match the pace of the 2 Viking warriors. Unexperienced by the cold wind, he dared not plunge directly into the icy waters, so he remained at the edge of the battlefield, doing nothing. Now, with a staff, he would at least be more useful in battle. If this adventure allowed him to advance to sequence 7 burner under the path of holy light, in addition to reciting the gospel, he would also be able to cast holy fire, providing a certain degree of combat capability. After distributing the 3 weapons, the remaining items in the box consisted of a few compasses removed from the captain's cabin, 7 or 8 telescopes, and some jade, thick clothing, and porcelain ornaments left behind by the Tang people. Amidst this miscellaneous items, a seemingly unremarkable black leather book at the bottom of the wooden box caught Loki's attention. The book itself showed signs of burning, and the only thing that attracted Olgor to it was the words on the cover, which were made of gold. They were very ancient hieroglyphics. I found this book in the wreckage of the flagship after it exploded. Oh, that was the flagship of the Tang fleet. There must be a lot of valuables inside, but they were all shattered when the gunpowder barrels exploded. What a pity. Ignoring Olgor for the moment, Loki flipped open the black book and found that the inner pages were also covered in hieroglyphics that bore a striking resemblance to QQ emoticons. If he took each of these words out individually, he might be able to use his imagination to connect them. But putting them together, it was like reading those sentences on WhatsApp made up entirely of emojis. With a long sigh, Loki shook his head helplessly, indicating that he truly couldn't understand them. But at this moment, a hollow and silent voice suddenly rang in his ears, as if someone was calling him from a very distant place. He quickly raised his hand to make a silencing gesture, looking towards the flickering campfire, straining his nerves to decipher the almost inaudible sound. "Hey, Crimson Apostle of the Red Moon. I've been waiting for you for a long time." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.